Hello. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. It's also sleeting outside, which, as in Utah, people say we need the moisture. That particular word is what people pray for, because that's the fix, not holding corporations accountable for climate change and inordinate use of water. Anyway, welcome to whatever this is, an attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. My name's Aubri Devashrayee. I'm getting started a little bit later today. I know this is fairly common with me. But we aren't going to go over as many things that I mentioned yesterday just by virtue of the amount of time that is available. But I still want to give a few updates on current events, talk about Che Guevara, and then have that lead into tomorrow of talking more about Cuba and the Congo. I have a couple of great videos that I want to watch. There is a Che Guevara documentary that I have been wanting to watch, and I think I may put that on the Patreon. Yeah. Because I need to actually build that out. Okay. So, since I like to start off with funny videos at the beginning of the stream, I found a couple of videos from The Onion that I've been wanting to watch. So, let's get into it. DOJ fails to redact thousands of secret Epstein family recipes. Amazing.
More revelations and criticism coming to light following the latest Epstein files release. The Department of Justice today facing intense scrutiny after reportedly failing to properly redact thousands of secret Epstein family recipes. Critics say the DOJ's most recent document dump has laid bare countless Epstein family bakes,
The
treats,
spelling,
soups.
that detail of how the spelling is horrendous, which some people think it's to make things harder to search for with law enforcement. And I think that is true, but also I think Jeffrey Epstein was not very smart.
Breads and stews that were never intended to be seen by the general public, angering advocacy groups and bipartisan lawmakers behind the Epstein files legislation.
The fact that anyone with an internet connection can just go online right now and see the full recipe for Nana Epstein's peanut butter pecan sandies is reprehensible. The amount of pecans that she crushes in this recipe is supposed to be a secret. I have never seen so much dill in a deviled egg recipe. You cannot unsee that.
ONN's Jason Copeland has been pouring through this latest trove of documents and joins us now. Jason, what's the scope of all this?
Yeah, well, I'm still going through all of this as we speak, Dwight, but it's quite wide-ranging, I can tell you that. Now, on the one hand, you have pages featuring President Trump, that look like this, but on the other, we're talking clear as day photos of Great Grand's cheddar ball recipe, a whole slew of pot pies here. I mean, it's just really sensitive information that clearly was never supposed to be made public.
And the backlash has been considerable, prompting the DOJ to release the following statement today, saying in part, quote, "It was never our intention to reveal the recipe for Aunt Jan's top secret potato salad in full, only ingredients pertinent to Mr. Epstein and his co-conspirators."
Well, I gotta
Hello,
say, if that was their
Aliana.
intention, Dwight,
Welcome,
they clearly
welcome.
failed. I mean, I'm
This
sorry,
is
I
a
don't
video
know how else
from
to
The
say
Onion.
it, but I'm just looking at it right now. It's right here, plain as day.
How are you
right now.
doing?
I'm seeing an email
Good
from
to see you.
1998 with Aunt Jan's top secret potato salad recipe. And it's right here. She doubles the typical amount of mayonnaise and adds a shake of cayenne at the end. I mean, it's here for anyone to see. It's quite shocking.
It is remarkable the level of detail that's just out there for anyone to follow along with in their home kitchen. Now, I understand some of Epstein's more high-profile connections may also be tangled up in this.
Well, that's correct, Dwight. You know, everyone from business partners to government officials to celebrities,
you're okay.
they all
Hopefully
apparently
you can
wanted a piece of what Epstein was
feeling
capable
better.
of serving
I know.
up, and now
State of
it's
the
out there
world is
just
a
for
mess.
everyone to see in broad daylight.
I'm doing all right.
Elon Musk
Hanging in
repeatedly
there.
asking Epstein, when's the best time for cornbread?
Trying to focus on
Billionaire
some of these
Richard
smaller
Branson emailing that
wins.
he'd, quote, love to see you as long as you bring that sweet Epstein banana pudding. And then this one here from New York Giants co-owner Steve Tisch.
Sweet
Blank email,
Epstein banana
subject
pudding.
line just says,
The joke in this is that the DOJ fails to redact thousands of secret Epstein family recipes, but they did redact all of the perpetrators.
Bolognese can have. I mean, it just goes on and on and on here, Dwight.
That's square. It's not. You can see her face. It's translucent. I'm a first worlder and I don't have a car. The state of the world doesn't really affect me as I don't have gas prices to worry about and I'm not being bombed. I'm quite well. True. Yeah, that's a good perspective. Things could be a lot worse. We have a lot of privileges in the Western world, for sure.
At this moment, we've got more than 200 instances of Alan Dershowitz
And I'm not
requesting
American.
details on how much
True.
coriander to use in Pop Epstein's
Yeah.
black bean soup.
Dershowitz did,
Things in
however,
the
put out a
US
statement
are
today saying,
such
quote,
a shit
although
show.
I admire black bean soup greatly and believe it can be eaten throughout the year, no matter the occasion.
But it can be worse, like in the places that the U.S. is currently having all of this violent aggression towards. I'm trans, I'd have to strap up if I was American. Yep, exactly. Also being a trans person, gender fluid, gender non-conforming. Yep, that's necessary in order to protect ourselves.
I have never tasted it once in my life.
I mean, Dwight, these folks can deny it all they want, but this does not look like it's going away anytime soon. You have Attorney General Pam Bondi on the defense now, standing firm, claiming that
I mean, she's been fired since then, but
simply knowing a recipe does not matter if it's not cooked with love, and that under her orders, the DOJ would remain
It's not
committed to
cooked with
maintaining
love.
transparency and only ever redacting President Trump's name.
All right, thank you, Jason. We'll have more from you later in the hour, but first, a live look in on the Senate floor, where Mitch McConnell
I feel like they did this in like a church. Those look like church pews.
has just entered hour 4 of a tense stare down with an apple he can't bring to his mouth. You've seen the news, now touch it with your fingers. To receive your monthly print edition of The Onion, head to membership.theonion.com today. With America's finest news source, the more you pay, the better the news.
Exactly. That's what corporate news is all about. The more capital they receive, the better the news. Just kidding. Just more falls under their propaganda pursuits. Okay, this is another video by The Onion. Police ask for public's help in falsifying report because they're so incompetent doing what they do.
Breaking news on a developing situation in New Jersey, where local law enforcement are asking for the public's help tonight in falsifying a report. Following a tense altercation that left Trenton resident Eduardo Cruz with severe bruising and a fractured collarbone, police are now struggling to find a lead on any excuses they can use to justify their excessive use of force.
Today we are asking any good Samaritans who may have witnessed the incident or who didn't but are willing to say they did, to come up with something, anything to make it seem like what we did was okay.
Officers are concerned they may have already exhausted all viable falsehoods after making up details on a deadly traffic stop report in 2023 and in an internal investigation into rampant sexual harassment within the department in 2024. But Trenton Police Chief Mark Understall remains hopeful that a community tip could help crack any case against them.
Saying that he lunged at us, or that he had a knife, or just something shiny that maybe could have been a knife, but it was too dark to tell. No made-up detail is too small.
I love how they're talking about that they need help falsifying the report, and he's like giving his own examples. They just like have a hard time writing it.
Police are instructing residents to call this number if they have any new lies or fake evidence they believe could help with this case, and are offering a $10,000 reward to anyone who knows how to erase body cam footage. Coming up next, a new study on the declining state of the nation's psychological well-being. Hear why mental health experts recommend you get a fucking grip. You're watching the Onion News Network, the only cable news network that watches back.
The only news that watches back. Oh, whoops. I did not mean to click that. Hold the phone. Okay. So, as an update with something that's happening in national politics, is that we had Bernie Sanders actually go on the Senate floor and introduce a vote to block nearly $500 million in bombs and bulldozers to Israel. Will this go through? Probably not. I haven't looked up the result. Have they already voted on it? I need to do that. I will do that while I'm playing the beginning of the video. BRB. Yeah, no worries. Do what you need to do. But I did hear that he calls it a genocide in this, in his opening statement, and that's very important. I heard him say genocide for the first time on the news. I think it was on Miss Never, MS Now. And he is saying it on the Senate floor. And that's important. It's a step in the right direction. I mean, there still is way too much involvement of Israeli Zionist PAC money and independent private billionaire donations and corporations as well that are aligned with the Zionist project. So that is a huge issue and is probably going to explain how they vote. But it is good to see him using the word genocide. I mean, it's taken a long time, so we have to acknowledge that. But also, as we're talking about these wins that we need to focus on, it is a win because it shows that there is even more pressure and just undeniable evidence that people are paying attention to of this genocide. I'm not going to play this whole thing. I'm just going to play Bernie's opening statements, and then I think Chris Van Hollen also speaks. He's a senator that has been against this genocide, has called it a genocide pretty early on. So I want to play some of his words as well.
To discharge Senate Joint Resolution 32, providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed foreign military sale to the government of Israel of certain defense articles and services from the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 36B1 of the Arms Export Control Act, I move to discharge the Committee on Foreign Relations from further consideration of SJ Res 138.
The clerk will report the motion.
The senator from Vermont, Mr. Sanders, moves to discharge Senate Joint Resolution 138, providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed foreign military sale to the government of Israel of certain defense articles and services from the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Vermont.
Thank you. Mr. President, let me begin by thanking Senator Kelly not only for his remarks and his work as a U.S. Senator, but for his service to our country in the military, and I very much appreciate his support for these resolutions. Mr. President, 60% of our people here in the United States live paycheck to paycheck. They are struggling to pay for groceries, for housing, for health care, and increasingly the ability to fill up their gas tanks in their cars in order to get to work. We also have a $37 trillion national debt. Bottom line, the American people, whether they are Democrats, Republicans, or independents, conservatives, moderates, or progressives, want to make certain that their tax dollars are spent responsibly. And in strong and growing numbers, they do not want us to continue spending billions of their taxpayer dollars in support of the illegal, horrific and expansionist war policies of the Netanyahu government in Israel. Since October 7th, 2023, the United States has provided over $21 billion in military aid to Israel. And today we are saying loudly and clearly, enough is enough. Mr. President, we all know that on October 7th, 2023, Hamas, a terrorist organization, attacked Israel.
I hear Kit.
They killed more than
He's
1,200
meowing.
innocent
It sounds very
men, women, and
lonesome.
children,
Come
and
here,
took
bud.
hundreds of hostages. I believe that there is no disagreement in this chamber that, like any other country on earth, Israel had the absolute right to respond to that barbaric Hamas attack. But, Mr. President, Israel did not have the right to violate international law and wage an all-out war of unspeakable destruction against the entire Palestinian people in what experts have correctly concluded is a genocide. Israel did not have the right, out of a population of 2.2 million, to kill more than 72,000 Palestinians in Gaza and wound over 170,000.
I'm gonna go check on Kit.
That is more than 10%
I'll keep this playing.
of the
I'll be right back.
population. If that happened here in America, that would be over 30 million Americans dead or wounded. And in Gaza, a strong majority of the dead and wounded are women, children, and the elderly. And by the way, that number is likely an underestimate as to the tragedy, as bodies are literally being pulled out of the rubble every single day. Mr. President, Israel did not have the right to destroy virtually all of Gaza's infrastructure, including its water and sewer systems and its supply of electricity. They did not have the right to demolish every one of Gaza's 12 universities, along with hundreds of schools, dismantling their entire educational system. Vast majority of the children in Gaza today are not in school. Israel did not have the right to indiscriminately bomb civilian neighborhoods and damage or destroy over 90% of the housing units in Gaza, over 90% damaged or destroyed, resulting in the vast majority of the population there now sleeping in tents. That is where they are today. Israel did not have the right to bomb over 90% of the hospitals in Gaza, and kill 1,700 healthcare workers. And, Mr. President, Israel did not have the right to impose a blockade which prevented food, water, and medicine from entering Gaza, resulting in thousands of Palestinians being diagnosed with malnutrition and hundreds actually starving to death. But, Mr. President, today we are not just talking about Gaza. In the West Bank, in direct violation of international law that protects Palestinian territory, Israeli soldiers and settlers since October 2023 have killed over 1,000 Palestinians, including 233 children. During that period, Mr. President, they have demolished more than 6,000 Palestinian homes and established more than 200 new illegal settlements and outposts in Palestinian territory. And let us be clear, because I think there is some confusion about this. These actions are not just the results of some extremists, out-of-control settlers who are just doing whatever they want. Those actions are consistent with Israeli government policy. Netanyahu's security cabinet has approved the most...
I do have an update. Punchbowl News. Record number of Senate Dems vote against Israel. Democrats in Israel. A stunning 40 Senate Democrats voted late Wednesday to block a U.S. weapons sale to Israel. The latest sign of the party's growing rift with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu-led government over its continued military campaigns in the region. Military campaigns, it's genocides and illegal aggression that is for unlimited expansion and death. Let's take a look at this. Which Democrats? Cory Booker actually voted for it? Wow. It is true. This is the most movement we have seen on this issue. It's still not enough, clearly. It is woefully insufficient for the genocide and unlimited death that Israel is doing to Palestinians and now to people in Lebanon. So, there's an update. But the fact that Cory Booker voted for that is wild. He receives a lot of AIPAC money and money from pro-Zionist lobbies and donors. So this is showing that there is a major tide shift. Again, it's woefully insufficient for what has been done. The harm and death and suffering that has been inflicted, there is no way to ever correct that. There's no way to repent for this. It's like the least that can be done is to stop arming them. So, again, trying to focus on some of the smaller wins. We still need to keep pushing, but the public is very much against this genocide. And the average American, the majority of Americans are against this genocide and funding Israel. Hi. Hi, buddy. What do you do? He's very vocal today. Huh. Okay, I'll keep playing this.
Sweeping changes
to
the West Bank's legal status since 1967, removing nearly all constraints on settlement expansion. Netanyahu himself declared, this is Netanyahu, quote, "There will never be a Palestinian state," end quote. And I say that to some people here who still say, well, we're in favor of a two-state solution. That is not Mr. Netanyahu's position. Quote, he said, "There will never be a Palestinian state." His finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, bragged that new settlement construction in the West Bank would bury, that's his word, bury the idea of a Palestinian state. But, Mr. President, it is not just Gaza and the West Bank. We now know that Netanyahu convinced President Trump to start an unprovoked and unconstitutional war on Iran. For 40 years, Netanyahu has wanted the United States to participate with Israel in a war against Iran, and finally, after 40 years of effort, he finally found in Trump a president willing to go along. He couldn't get Democratic presidents in the past, couldn't get Republican presidents in the past. In Trump, he finally found a president willing to go along. This war in violation of international law has resulted already in the deaths of thousands of civilians, including hundreds of children in Iran and Lebanon, including 26 Israeli civilians who are now dead and 13 American soldiers who have lost their lives so far in this conflict. Mr. President, all over the world, certainly including the United States, hundreds of millions of innocent people are suffering the economic consequences of this war with higher prices and growing scarcity of basic goods. I believe that in Vermont now, the price of gas, regular gas, is about $4 a gallon. Parts of the country, it is even higher than that. But, Mr. President, for Netanyahu, Gaza was not enough. Attacking Iran was not enough. Netanyahu is now waging a full-blown war of expansion against Lebanon. That war in Lebanon has not only killed more than 2,000 people, but has resulted in Israel occupying 14% of Lebanese territory. Let me repeat that. The war in Lebanon has not only killed more than 2,000 people, but has resulted in Israel occupying 14% of Lebanese territory. Mr. President, the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has announced that all Lebanese border villages will be demolished. His exact words, following, quote, the model in Gaza.
It's evil.
Border villages.
Evil.
Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, has warned that Dayaya, a suburb of South Beirut, quote, will look like Khan Yunis, end quote, a city in Gaza that Israel reduced to rubble. In other words, what they did in Gaza is now what they intend to do in parts of Lebanon. And these, Mr. President, are not threats, they are promises. For all of the reasons that I have given, and more, and you're going to hear more from some of my colleagues in a few moments, support for Israel in this country has plummeted. Today, according to a recent Pew poll, 80% of Democrats now have an unfavorable opinion of Israel, and 41% of Republicans share that view. And the numbers in all parties among young people are even higher. Young people, whether they are young Democrats, progressives, conservatives, do not want us to continue to fund the horrific war policies of Netanyahu. A recent Quinnipiac poll also found that 60%, including 3/4 of Democrats, 2/3 of independents, and 37% of Republicans, I say that to my Republican colleagues, 37% of Republicans do not want the U.S. sending more military aid to Israel. And that is why, Mr. President, I am offering today 2 joint resolutions of disapproval, the only formal mechanism Congress has to block an arms
Be
sale.
involved.
The first resolution would block the sale of
This little cat bed. I was trying to get him to go in there.
in 1,000-pound bombs. The second would block $295 million in bulldozers, the machines used to demolish homes in the West Bank and Gaza, and make a Palestinian state physically impossible. Mr. President, the time is long overdue for members of the U.S. Senate to start listening to the American people and not to AIPAC. The time is now for us to end all U.S. military aid to the extremist Netanyahu government, and a yes vote is an important
long
way
overdue
forward. Mr. President, with that, I would yield to my colleague from Maryland, Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the two resolutions offered by my colleague, Senator Sanders, that would bar the transfer of certain offensive weapons and equipment to the Netanyahu government. Specifically, these resolutions would block the transfer of 12,000 1,000-pound bombs and 132 armored bulldozers, valued at more than $446 million and funded entirely by American taxpayers. Mr. President, we cannot continue to provide a blank check to the Netanyahu government as it continues to use U.S. weapons in violation of U.S. and international law. As I've long said, Israel was justified in its war against Hamas after the horrific attack of October 7, 2023.
It's always that qualification.
But the Netanyahu government,
ignoring the fact that there were circumstances that led to October 7th. But this is typical of fascist policies and techniques to be like, oh, well, there are these terrorist groups that we created because of our oppression that we then are going to claim are all evil, that there isn't a reason for this militancy when people are doing this out of self-preservation.
is not justified in imposing collective punishment on all the people of Gaza. As Senator Merkley and I wrote in our report after traveling to the region in August 2025, and I quote, "The Netanyahu government is implementing a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians. America is complicit." And now, as Senator Sanders indicated, Israeli leaders are saying out loud they plan to apply the same plans in southern Lebanon as they implemented in Gaza. Senator Sanders mentioned threatening what they did in Khan Yunis. As recently as March 31st, Israeli Defense Minister Katz said that, and I quote, "All homes in Lebanese villages near the border will be destroyed in accordance with the Rafah and Beit Hanun model in Gaza," unquote. Well, colleagues, I've visited Gaza. I visited the Gaza crossing, the Rafah crossing twice, along with my colleague, Senator Merkley. First in January 2024.
It looks like Chuck Schumer, he is going to be overthrown. I mean, hopefully, please, God, that I don't believe in. Please, spirits, any sort of force out there, do not let him continue to be in power. But there are people wondering who is going to be the next Senate minority, hopefully Senate majority leader. And many people are thinking that Bernie won't be able to get the support, but some people think that Chris Van Hollen may. Hello, Turd Bomb. Welcome. Yeah, if we could get fuck Schumer out of there, that would help a lot. Certainly.
When Rafah's population had quadrupled from pre-war levels.
We don't want him replaced with
to
someone
more than
similar.
1 million people who've
How are
been
you doing?
displaced within Gaza, from northern Gaza. And then we traveled to the Rafah crossing in August 2025, after the IDF's offensive against Rafah, one that the Biden administration claimed that they tried to stop. And on that visit, Senator Merkley and I climbed a rooftop, and you could look into Rafah, obliterated, reduced to absolute rubble. And as we were told by former IDF soldiers, eyewitnesses who had the courage to speak with us, Israel has systematically dismantled essential infrastructure and wrought near total destruction of the civilian sites throughout Gaza, including through the use of these bulldozers and 100,000-pound bombs. And now the Israeli Minister of Defense says they're going to do the same thing in southern Lebanon. And indeed, since the war in Lebanon restarted, Israeli forces have killed over 2,000 people, including 250 people in 10 minutes the day after the ceasefire was announced.
Driving home.
Entire
Nice.
villages have been destroyed.
Build that trench.
And over 1.1 million people displaced. Now, let's not forget how we got
I'm glad that
to this most recent round
is complete
of destruction
for you.
in the region. President
How
Trump
often
is
do you
fully
have to
responsible
dig
for
trenches?
getting America into this war,
I'm curious.
period. But we know from Trump administration officials and public reporting how Prime Minister Netanyahu, for his own reasons, was pushing Trump to attack Iran. Indeed, he said it himself. On April 11th, Netanyahu boasted to the Israeli public that Israel was, quote, first to act because we knew what was at stake. But if I had told you a year ago that our pilots, men and women, would fly in Iran, who would have believed it? Said Prime Minister Netanyahu. Went on to say, if I had told you a year ago that the United States of America, the strongest power in the world, would fight by our side, shoulder to shoulder, wing to wing for nearly 40 days against the common enemy, who would have believed it?
Yeah.
And then Prime Minister Netanyahu went on to say,
to our utter disgrace and shame that the U.S. government is doing this. I mean, more often than before, but mostly because there aren't hardly any installs to do. Oh, interesting. It's like kind of rainy. It was snowing for a little bit, maybe even a little bit right now as I'm looking out the window. I mean, too little, too late, but I guess we'll take what we can get. The moisture. Is it precipitating where you're at? Because I'm like, that would be miserable digging trenches in that weather. Although I guess it would like soften up the ground. Today was cold and windy. Ooh. Yeah, that's pretty rough. I hope you're able to stay warm out there. Okay, I think that's the amount that I'm going to show. So this didn't pass. People were voting against it to block all of these arms to Israel. And we have seen some senators shift on this position, like notably Cory Booker. Very surprising. And this is good because it shows that they are actually listening to public pressure. It's not even because they have gained some sort of moral clarity, similar with the like MAGA people, the conservative people who are disillusioned with Trump. It's because, and like the talking heads of like Alex Jones and Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson and shit, it's because they realize that they're losing support and that they are worried about their place and having that public support rather than doing the right thing, in my mind. I've worked in worse conditions. Well, I guess there's that. Always an upside. Okay, so I found out about this yesterday. Utah candidate under fire for comments about Latter-day Saints. I don't care about that. I don't care what he has said about the church. I mean, I haven't heard what he has said because oftentimes it's deserved, but there was something that he was commenting about of like sexual assault previously and in the past, that's the same thing. Fuck the church. Yeah, exactly. It's like we can separate like Mormons from Mormon doctrine, but also like that brainwashing makes people act in ways that support the doctrine, which is blatantly discriminatory, white supremacist, and colonizing. But I think these other comments that he made in the past, I have not heard, but I want to find out more about it.
First, a developing story as the fallout against State Senator Nate Bluin continues, with many Democrats condemning his past comments. Well, tonight, some members of his own party are calling for him to drop out of the congressional race and resign from office.
News specialist Garna Mejia is gathering reactions. Garna?
Yeah, well, Democratic State Senator Nate Bluin was first elected to the legislature in 2022, but now he's a top contender in the race for Congressional District 1. Despite an apology, backlash within his own party is growing.
Honestly, it's disheartening, and I expected a lot more from him.
From his Democratic opponents in Congressional District 1 to leaders of his own party, swift reactions against State Senator Nate Bluin, condemning his recently surfaced post riddled with offensive language against women, people with disabilities, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 36-year-old Bluin made the post between 2009 and 2015. One post he said, quote, "Mormons were the worst part of living in Utah," and wrote that the LDS...
Well, is he wrong? The LDS Church is definitely just a front for the largest U.S. drug cartel. Well, I mean, that's so funny to me. But this is why it's like reason enough alone to not want to run for public office is just like digging up all sorts of shit. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be shitting on the church because of how much harm I personally experienced and how much harm they continually commit. I'm pumped to go to Utah. Yes, I know, we need to see you. I'm sorry, I'm so bad at texting. But we'll convene, Brent and I, and let you know. Is that Linus Tech Tips? I don't know what that is. Linus Tech? I'm going to look that up.
Church is a front for a drug cartel. He also talked about sexual violence, other comments too graphic to air. Today, Bluin apologizing, saying, quote, "There's no excuse for his posts, calling them vulgar, saying they reflect a younger version of himself that he's ashamed of," adding that he spent the past decade of his life trying to become someone worth trusting, promising he will keep showing up every day.
It's just gross commentary. There's not an acceptable age to call women the C word or to use a slur about people with disabilities or to joke about defecating in an LDS church parking lot.
House and Senate
Okay, those other things I don't agree with, of using slurs and speaking in a derogatory manner about people with disabilities. I mean, there are some people who I think probably deserve to be called the C word, so I don't know what the post is. I would have to see it. Or if it's like a sweeping generalization he was making about women in general. I don't know. I'm going to have to look up this post. But the defecating in an LDS church parking lot, that is really funny to me. Yeah, do it. Go for it. I'm going to a show Saturday. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I'm sure he would love to. Yeah, I'll talk with him as well. We've been so busy lately. But yeah, we do want to see you.
Democrats releasing a joint statement saying his comments are, quote, "personally hurtful to us and to the people we represent." In another statement, Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson said he shouldn't continue to serve in public office or seek election to Congress.
Bluin post.
Now, Bluin also said in that statement that he released that he was horrified when a reporter sent him his post, and he believes that candidates should take full accountability. It's still unclear if he plans to resign from office and drop out of the race. We'll keep you posted. For now, I'll send it back to you.
All right. Yeah, we'll see what happens with this, Garna. Thank you.
Okay. I'm trying to see what this post is, and there are probably people digging things up. Like, people should be held accountable for their comments. But he is also more progressive, and so that is another reason why people are having a motivation to do this. That doesn't excuse his behavior by any means. Okay. I'll be at Fools for Jazz. Oh, yeah. I have to see what we have going on, but that would be so fun. I love Fools for Jazz. We both did Fools for Jazz. I only did it once, but you did it multiple times. Yeah, he was endorsed by Bernie. I knew that. And Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, Maxwell Frost, Jill Takuda. So progressives in Congress. They originally appeared on Reddit and some sports and outdoor rec forums. Okay. Amid some derogatory jokes and slurs are comments that are particularly likely to inflame Latter-day Saints and women, overlapping groups that could be decisive in a Utah Democratic primary. Bluin in 2013 called Mormons the worst part about living in Utah. Yeah. And said he once defecated in a church parking lot. That's cool. That's fierce behavior. In 2014, when a former BYU student was charged with sexual battery after 16 women reported being groped on campus, Bluin wrote, "While slapping girls' asses as you run by is inappropriate, it shouldn't land you in jail or anything by that means." Oh my God. Yeah, that's not great. And so this was his response, what they're saying. These comments are offensive and personally hurtful to us and the people we represent. People are calling on him to withdraw. Yeah, this is going along the lines of Congress people resigning, Representative Gonzalez and Swalwell, which they need to. Yeah, and we see that Graham Plattner, he's still in the race for Senate, and he had a Nazi tattoo that he, like, that is such, like, white person behavior of growing up in this white supremacist, fascist environment. It's like, I don't know, from what it seems like, or what he has said, it is not something he knew about, but yeah, it's like many people grow up not knowing what like white supremacist symbols are. But yeah, I mean, it's something that we have to keep talking about, but under this white supremacist fascist environment or regime, it does lead to people having to deconstruct these things. Okay. So, moving along, I actually, just as like rounding this out, I actually interviewed him on a stream at a protest that I went to that he was also at, was against ICE. And he has a lot of progressive policies. And so this is a way to attack progressives, but also I think he should be held accountable. Like, those comments are not appropriate at all. But honestly, yeah, so many people have comments like this. Who did you interview? Nate Bluin, that state senator that we were just talking about, how he said Mormons are the worst part of Utah, which they are. That's just the truth. These colonizers, Zionists that have caused a lot of harm. Based take. Yeah. His other take about like the sexual assault allegations, that's not good. Like, hopefully he's done work to deconstruct his sexism, but yeah, I think we need people who are willing to actually own up to when they've done something wrong. So, like, that is good. But yeah, I don't care about his comments about the church. Okay, so moving along, I wanted to talk about Che Guevara, and this is a video, why do we love Che Guevara but not Fidel Castro? And, oh, I had another video as well. It was before this. Hold on. Let me pull that up. The revolutionary, yep, it was this. Here we go. Please hold. Yeah, I had this one in my mind lined up first. Especially as, you know, we have this aggression and sanctions that are happening against Cuba that are completely reprehensible. I think it's good to talk about the history of Cuba, why in the US we've been so propagandized to be against Cuba, because there, guess what, is a communist revolutionary history there. Okay. And also he tried to help start a revolution in the Congo, and that did not work out. But I want to be talking more about the Congo tomorrow, and I have a video for that as well, just to provide a segue into the content.
Perhaps no revolutionary has been as romanticized as Ernesto Guevara, or Che as he was known. The Argentine-born doctor who fought by Fidel Castro's side played a key role in the Cuban Revolution. He then tried to launch Marxist uprisings in the Congo and then Bolivia, where he was captured and executed. The images taken after his death, in which many say he looked like Christ, only added to his legend as a left-wing martyr. The Oscar-winning film Motorcycle Diaries was based on his early years. When he was 14, Harry Villegas joined Che in the fight for revolution in the Cuban mountains. For the next 12 years, he never left his side, until he miraculously managed to escape capture during Che's final battle against the Bolivian army.
Build a base in Cuba? Yeah, I haven't heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I'm going to look that up. I know that they are very invested in Cuba, that they were one of the few ships of aid that were actually let through by the US, because the US is, like, as we know, to Israel, being like a servant of Israel, Israeli interests, but also to Russian interests too. I'm gonna look that up.
We hid behind bushes, and on a small radio we heard the news that Che had been captured and killed. The wings of our hearts fell.
Villegas says that Che's reputation as a tough but just revolutionary who practiced what he preached was well earned.
He felt that because he had more education than us, he had greater obligations to set the example, to always lead by example. He never cut himself a break, so that he could demand the best from us.
Today, Che Guevara's image has become immortalized, especially in Cuba.
Some would probably say too much. Che Guevara has become the ultimate revolutionary icon, a must-have for all the tourists that come to this island. His face is absolutely everywhere, from these bags to
I think they
t-shirts,
have
as you
tried
can see,
to revive
knapsacks,
a
everything you
base
can possibly
in
imagine.
the past.
The kind of image that Che Guevara himself would probably not have approved of.
But he would surely have been proud to know that for the
could be
last
happening
50
that I'm not
years,
aware of.
Cuban schoolchildren have been taught to follow his example. Every
They
morning
did
of every day, they
provide
recite
some
this
aid.
chant. It means pioneers for communism. We shall be like Che. But do the new generations of Cubans really believe it? We consulted a group we found trying to access a Wi-Fi signal next to an internet cafe.
It's like a poem that you memorize, but you don't act on it. Very few people actually follow in Che's footsteps. We all think differently.
Today, Che's Marxist version of revolution is considered by most as an anachronism. Yet the consensus here seems to be that Che represents an ideal, a selfless rebel who, unlike so many others, did not live to betray his principles. And it's that image of Che that has never aged. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Havana.
I knew his face and photo even before I knew who he was. Same with me. Great people never die because their spirit and influence lives in the hearts of millions. The wings of our hearts fell. He inspired such emotion and poetry. Yeah. Okay. So, moving along. This was the video that I had up previously. Why do we love Che Guevara and not Fidel Castro? Guerrero. No. Guerrillero. Wow. My horrible Spanish. Guerrillero. That's tough.
Heroico, one of the most iconic photographs of the 20th century. Taken by Alberto Corda in 1960, it quickly spread across social movements across the globe. Looking at the...
Okay, it's not showing the captions, so I'm wondering if it's going to do that thing where I need to refresh anyway.
This is Guerrillero Heroico, one of the most iconic photographs of the 20th century. Taken by Alberto Corda in 1960, it quickly spread across social movements across the globe. Looking at the image, it's not hard to see why it captured the hearts of so many people. Here's an attractive, rugged, determined revolutionary ripped from context and space so that it appeals to anyone with a vision for a better world. And the story of the real Che Guevara really lives up to the art. Being one of the founding fighters behind the Cuban Revolution, after overthrowing the Batista regime, he decided to leave his government post behind and fight with revolutionaries across the world. He had accomplished everything he wanted and decided to leave it all behind anyway. The Eternal Revolutionary ended up dying at the hands of the Bolivian army in the thick of the Bolivian jungle. His response to his captors echoed through time.
Sé que vienes a matarme. Dispara, cobarde, que solamente vas a matar a un hombre.
This is the short romantic history of Che Guevara that's known in popular culture. But his sworn comrade and confidant, Fidel Castro, hardly gets the same affection. Both men fought valiantly, overthrew an oppressive regime, and changed the fate of the world forever. But outside of Chicano communities, the popular appeal of Fidel is limited. And even among radicals, many criticize Fidel for the shortcomings of the Cuban government. Putting aside any real criticisms we might have of the two revolutionaries, this dichotomy of legacy is a part of a wider problem. We love revolutionaries, but...
He also had really great hair. That helps to have your legacy be bolstered by good hair.
only when they're martyrs. Jones Manuel is a historian and a member of the Partido Comunista Brasileiro, and he believes that this dichotomy has a lot to do with the influence of Christianity on Western culture. And if my audience statistics are correct, and you're a 20 to 30 something male living in the United States, you probably don't think Christianity or the Catholic Church would ever have an influence in your way of thinking, but Manuel would disagree. The Catholic Church is the longest operating institution in the West. No other institution has managed to stay alive for so long with a capacity to disseminate and circulate ideas and concepts through a body of intellectual priests, bishops, and theologians organized within a bureaucracy like the Catholic Church has. So it's impossible to speak seriously about Marxism, politics, subjectivity.
Going back to that Nate Bluin thing, it's like I think we need to be looking into if he has done anything that is illegal or how he has harmed women. It's like I do know that people have the capacity to change, and like him saying those things are not good. Like I don't like that. but it warrants more investigation. But I don't know if that is necessarily disqualifying. He's like, they understand what I'm trying to say. Oh my god. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess Nate Bloom was saying some slurs too. Ugh.
Culture and the
what a
symbolic
mess.
field in the West without incorporating the role of Christianity in each social formation, in each specific country as elements of analysis. Christianity forms the structure upon which culture in the United States is built upon. It influences the tales we tell about ourselves and others. Even if as individuals we're not Christian, it's an ever-present force, just like Confucianism in China and Islam in Africa. Now, I wouldn't be the first to draw parallels between Jesus Christ and Che Guevara, but it's a comparison worth noting. We love Che because on some level, he's a secular Jesus Christ. He's so powerful as a symbol because he died a saintly death.
All of
Meanwhile,
the Christ
Fidel's an
imagery I
old
love.
bureaucrat, and this doesn't provide the same visceral feelings of affection. But don't let that fool you. Fidel's Cuba is what Che was fighting for, and every single stumbling block, every bad decision, and every error are part of the same legacy. As much as many would like to, there is no separating them. They're the same struggle. Many people might disagree and say, well, Fidel betrayed the ideals of the revolution. If they're socialists, they'll probably point to the mistakes as examples of how what he was doing wasn't real socialism. And I understand why people do this, but Manuel would argue that it's another facet of Christian influence on Western thinkers. Like a theologian trying to explain away the blood-stained past of Christianity, they'll argue that the doctrine is one of compassion and love for one another. Sure, the church might have worked with dictators and fascists, enabled widespread suffering and abuse, but hey, those were misapplications of the Holy Gospel. Manuel writes that there is a constant throughout the entire history of Christianity, which is that these elements don't corrupt the doctrine. They are either false expressions of Christianity, or they're just facts, like potatoes in a sack, that have no theoretical, political, or most importantly, theological meaning. According to some people, it seems like every time the dust of the revolution settles, the new government, the new institutions, and the new leaders betray the doctrine. Therefore, nothing is socialism and everything is state capitalism. Nothing is socialist transition and everything is state capitalism. The revolution is only a revolution during that
storied back and forth discord between socialists and communists is very storied.
Glorious moment of taking political power. Starting from
as
the
we were
moment
also
of building a
seeing
new
yesterday
social order,
with
it's over.
The video I was showing of El Sadawi, where she's socialist but was against the Marxists. And, you know, it's like, it's not a bad thing to have disagreements about things on the left. I think that is kind of this misconception that we can't have any sort of disagreement with one another on the left, but that we can recognize that each person and their ideology has a place for doing certain kinds of resistance, and that we need to have numbers. And so it doesn't help. I mean, it depends on what kind of resistance you are engaging in, but like helping people to be guided towards the options that actually resonate with them and that moves the needle.
This is a problem, because the destruction of an existing social order only constitutes half of a revolution, and the other half is building something new. Without critically engaging with what happened in that second half, and instead just disowning its legacy, we fail to understand the revolution and the people involved entirely. But this only explains one facet of the problem. Inherent with our love for martyrs, we also romanticize failure and poverty. Manuel highlights the discrepancy in treatment between Palestine and North Korea. Both countries fought similar struggles and ended up decimated by imperialism. In the case of North Korea, the country lost around 15% of its population in the Korean War, with the US bombings leaving the country a desolate wasteland. Don't believe me?
Yeah,
in
the
1951,
continued
Senator John C.
imperialist
Stennis
aggression.
stated,
"Oh yes,
goes back.
I would say that almost the
It explains a lot of the militancy and revolutionaries that, I mean, not just the US, but fighting imperialism and capitalist extraction and oppression that the US also perpetuates globally.
entire Korean peninsula is just a terrible mess. Everything is destroyed, and there's nothing standing worthy of the name."
Meanwhile, Palestine has been described as an open-air prison, with Israel openly committing genocide upon the Palestinian people. But look at the differences between how the two are treated. Korea is not a defenseless nation. Palestinians are a people
It was
who
5
are
years ago.
deeply oppressed in a situation of extreme poverty. Therefore, Palestine is the total incarnation of the metaphor of David versus Goliath, except that this David doesn't have a chance of beating Goliath in political and military conflict. Therefore, almost everyone in the international left likes Palestine. People become ecstatic looking at those images, which I don't think are very fantastic, of a child or a teenager using a sling to launch a rock at a tank. Look, this is a clear example of heroism, but it is also a symbol of barbarism. This is a people who do not have the capacity to defend themselves.
Yeah, people
facing
shouldn't
an
be put in
imperialist
that position in
colonial
the first
power
place.
that is armed to the teeth. They do not have an equal capacity of resistance, but this is romanticized. Western leftists like the situation of oppression, suffering, and martyrdom. Meanwhile, North Korean people are not treated with any sympathy over their struggle against imperialism. When talking about North Korea, the story never starts with the United States decimating the country, with North Koreans living paranoid and fearful of US bombings for over 3 years. Progressives like John Oliver, who are the supposed voice of the left, hardly even bring it up. But since they weren't beaten into the dust and instead stood up and built a nation that could contend with these global superpowers, they're suddenly not worthy of consideration, not worthy of critical support against an imperialist force that wants to wipe them off the face of the planet. Finally, I'm going to quote Manuel one final time because he's a damn good writer and says this all way better than I ever could. The idealization of Che and dismissal of Fidel is a microcosm for the larger idealization of eternal resistance. When Bernie Sanders lost the Democratic primary for the second time, a renowned Marxist professor at the University of Sao Paulo posted on Facebook, "We fought like never before. We lost as usual, but the fight continues. Now, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is the future of socialism in the United States." The Marxist logic of thinking of all political conflicts in terms of strategy, tactics, coalition politics, programs, of critically analyzing mistakes to avoid making them again, of hitting the enemy from a political or even military standpoint in order to take power, has simply vanished, replaced by an eternal movement of resistance, as if it were proof of divine grace. The very logic that should be the essence of politics, which is the logic of strategy,
Bernie
is
has looked
devalued
old
as
his
resistance
entire
becomes
life,
an end
I think.
to itself. This explains why the image of Che, the eternal revolutionary, is so popular. For the past 50 years, that's all movements have aspired to be, an eternal resistance. And in that light, the guerrillero heroico takes on a corrupted meaning. It's no longer an image of representing brave revolutionaries. It stands as a symbol of left complacency, a resistance too fearful to take risks, build power, and meaningfully challenge the status quo. No wonder it's been co-opted and plastered on anything you can imagine. Maybe next time I'll print Fidel stickers instead of Che ones. Now, if you made it this far, I don't want you to think I'm apologizing for atrocities or supporting men like Fidel, Kim Jong-un. No wonder it's been co-opted and plastered on anything you can imagine. Maybe next.
We cannot be sure of having something to live for unless we are willing to die for it. Yeah, that's a famous quote.
Next time I'll print Fidel stickers instead of Che ones. Now, if you made it this far, I don't want you to think I'm apologizing for atrocities or supporting men like Fidel, Kim Jong-un, or anyone else in everything they've done. But they're just that, men. Individuals who had to navigate the turbulent waters of being the figurehead of a movement and then nation of a million conflicting interests, trying to build a new world surrounded by forces that antagonize them at every single turn. And just like Fidel and Che were engaged in the same struggle, if you're anti-imperialist, you're engaged in the same common struggle as authoritarian leaders like Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela or of the Vietnamese Republic. We can critically examine the mistakes of a hereditary monarchy like that of North Korea. We can find that we don't agree with the policies of countries like China, and we can vow to do better than past generations of revolutionaries. But we have to engage critically with the work of movements who have come before us. Because once we start dismissing these struggles without any other thought, then we might as well stop calling ourselves leftists. Anyway, that's the video. I printed out stickers that I'm giving out to anyone who's ever supported the channel with a donation.
Well, that's cute. This Malcolm X quote, "You cannot separate peace from freedom because no one's at peace unless he has freedom." Yep. I think I like the nuance at the end, talking about things. I'm probably further left than this person, I'm guessing. Just to acknowledge, I mean, he did talk about how it is fighting imperialism, and that when we are fighting these empires, how the governments that replace imperial rule and influence, that they can have policies and implement them in ways that are not necessarily the most equitable or liberating for all kinds of people, but we have to acknowledge why it got there in the first place. Is that if there hadn't been imperialist extraction and intervention and oppression, then they wouldn't even be in that position to begin with. Okay. So I wanted to watch this. Che Guevara's epic fail in the Congo. I think that's kind of rude to say it that way. I mean, it's kind of true. But also, I am intrigued about how they're going to frame this. Because from what I've seen, African biographics, they are more leftist, so they're more open to the kind of politics and policies that Che was advocating for. So let's give this a watch. And then tomorrow, this will lead into our discussion about the Congo.
Ernesto Che Guevara, a devoted revolutionary and internationalist who became one of the leaders of the Cuban Revolution and of the struggle against colonialism, neocolonialism, and oppression in the developing world. Until the end of his life, Guevara would hold to the view that as many fronts as possible should be opened in the battle against imperialism. This is why, in April of 1965, as the Congo crisis was unfolding, Che Guevara left for the Congo to fight alongside Lumumba's rebels, as the late Patrice Lumumba's supporters were called, who were fighting against the establishment in the Congo. Unfortunately, as Che Guevara even stated himself, it was a story of failure. In this episode of African Biographics, we cover the story of Ernesto Che Guevara's mission to fight in the Congo and why this mission was an epic fail. The Democratic Republic of the Congo immediately became engulfed in crisis following its independence from Belgium in 1960, and this crisis was exacerbated after the country's first elected Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, was overthrown and then murdered in January of 1961. In 1964, a new rebellion began in the eastern Congo when armed fighters, known as the Simbas, began to spread across the region. Ironically, Moise Tshombe, who had led the secessionist Katanga province of the Congo, was made prime minister, with his mandate being to defeat these rebels and end other regional revolts. In November of 1964, with the intent of helping the Congolese government crush this uprising, the United States government provided planes to transport Belgian troops and white mercenaries to the Congo. Now, because of the Cold War conflict at the time between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its allies, the situation in the Congo became a major international political crisis. A group of radical African states led by Algeria and Egypt also announced that they would supply the Congolese rebels who were fighting against the government with arms and troops. These radical states also called on others for help, and the Cuban government announced that it would oblige. This is how Ernesto Che Guevara came into the picture. Che Guevara was a prominent communist figure in the Cuban Revolution who went on to become a guerrilla leader in South America. This revolutionary leader was born on 14 June 1928 in Rosario, Argentina. After completing his medical studies at the University of Buenos Aires, Guevara became politically active, first in his native Argentina and then in neighboring Bolivia and Guatemala.
He was photogenic. Whoa, this frame is crazy. That was very trippy, that zooming. I am wanting to watch, I said this earlier, but I'm wanting to watch this documentary on Che Guevara, and I think I'm going to put it up on the Patreon, so stay tuned.
He met Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro and his brother Raul while in Mexico. Che Guevara became part of Fidel Castro's efforts to overthrow the Batista government in Cuba. When Fidel Castro took power in 1959, Guevara became in charge of the La Habana fortress prison. It is estimated that at least 144 people were executed on Guevara's extrajudicial orders during this time. Later, he became the president of the Cuban National Bank and helped to shift the country's trade relations from the United States to the Soviet Union. In December of 1964, Fidel Castro, then leader of Cuba, sent Che Guevara to represent his country at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In his well-publicized speech at the United Nations, Che denounced the involvement of the United States government and its allies in the Congo and other parts of Africa.
Yeah, that's a famous speech.
He also reminded the members
Really
of the
fierce.
United Nations General Assembly that Patrice Lumumba was murdered following the occupation of the country by a United Nations force that Lumumba himself had requested. In his speech, Guevara also stressed that this force had allowed Lumumba's opponents to capture and kill him with impunity. Che Guevara claimed the United States and other Western imperialist countries used the United Nations to depose Lumumba and kill thousands of Congolese, and that their purpose was to defend white supremacy in Africa and continue Western imperialist control over the Congo's vast mineral resources. It is important to keep in mind that until the end of his life, Guevara held the view that as many fronts as possible should be opened in the battle against imperialism. This is why he soon embarked on the mission to fight alongside the rebels in the Congo. With the objective of making this strategy become reality through establishing and consolidating Cuban relations with radical African governments and liberation movements, Guevara left Cuba in December of 1964 to embark on an Africa tour. Including the nations of Ghana, he also visited Algeria, Congo-Brazzaville, Egypt, and finally Tanzania. It was while in Tanzania that Guevara had the chance to meet one Laurent Desire Kabila, a 26-year-old assembly member from North Katanga, a former student in Paris and Belgrade who hoped to establish a provisional government for the liberated territories of the East. When the Lumumbis rebels formed the Council of National Liberation, the CNL, Laurent Kabila was sent to Eastern Congo to help organize a revolution, in particular in the Kivu and North Katanga provinces. This revolution was part of the larger Simba rebellions happening in the provinces at the time. In 1965, Kabila set up a cross-border rebel operation from Kigoma, Tanzania, across Lake Tanganyika. Now, in this meeting in Tanzania, Laurent Kabila made an excellent impression on Guevara. For instance, he made a clear, specific and resolute presentation of the situation in the Congo and realized that the main enemy was Western imperialism. Anyways, during this encounter, Che Guevara promised Kabila that he would provide a group of 30 instructors to help train Congolese rebel forces. On Kabila's insistence, these instructors would be black so as not to arouse suspicion of Cuban help. During his time in Cairo, Egypt, Che Guevara got the chance to meet another Congolese rebel leader, Gaston Somalio, who requested fighters and monetary aid for the Stanleyville Front in the Congo. While there, Che Guevara also met with Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, whom he had fraternal relations with since 1959. The two discussed Che's plan to export the Cuban path of liberation in the Congo. However, Gamal Abdel Nasser discouraged him from embarking on this mission. He even told him that what he wanted to do was merely impossible. Well, Che Guevara did not heed the warning. He was already fully committed to applying his experience with the Cuban Revolution's success to movements all over the world, particularly in the Congo. A few other African leaders who Che Guevara met during this tour also held the same sentiment as Gamal Abdel Nasser. But anyways, Guevara did not heed the warning. He was already committed to applying his experience with the Cuban Revolution's success to movements all over the world. Che Guevara wanted to establish a Cuban-led military training center in the Eastern Congo. He hoped revolutionaries from all over the African continent would come to his base to train and gain valuable fighting skills and experience that they would then take back to their respective countries. In preparation for the Congo expedition, Che removed himself from public view at the end of March of 1965. In the interest of this secrecy and to avoid detection of his movements, Che Guevara was to undergo a physical transformation that would make him unrecognizable even to former comrades. Before leaving Cuba, Che Guevara also wrote a farewell letter to Fidel Castro declaring that he would extend the Cuban Revolution's influence, and also stating that, and I quote, "Other nations are calling for the aid of my modest efforts." When Che Guevara left for the Congo in April of 1965, he led a hand-picked group of mostly black Cuban soldiers so as not to arouse suspicion of Cuban help. Their clandestine mission was carefully planned by Cuban intelligence, which planted a false report in the Dominican Republic that Che Guevara had arrived in that country in April and had been killed shortly thereafter in the civil war going on at the time. So while the United States CIA was looking for evidence of Che's presence in the Dominican Republic, he and his squad were able to leave Cuba, travel to Africa, and enter the Congo with complete secrecy. Meanwhile, Che Guevara entered Tanzania using the name Ramon Benitez and was later referred to by his nom de guerre, Tattoo. For this mission, the main group of rebels that Che Guevara had chose to support operated in the mountains along the western shore of Lake Tanganyika.
Hello,
and this group
Tan.
was led by Laurent
Welcome.
Kabila. When
Cute.
Che Guevara
The
entered
cat
Tanzania
emoji.
in April of
How are you doing?
1965 with the intention of going into the Congo, his presence was unknown to the rebel leaders. By not informing them of his arrival, Che Guevara denied them the opportunity to organize the rebel forces in advance. Unaware that Guevara would be joining the fight in the Congo at that time, Kabila was in Cairo with other members of the CNL. The rebel leaders, including Kabila, were meeting in Cairo to try and reduce the political divisions within their movement. And so this meant that only relatively junior personnel were available to Che Guevara. Nevertheless, on 22 April 1965, Guevara led the secret contingent of 100-odd Cuban soldiers to assist the Congolese rebels. The team set off from Dar es Salaam for Lake Tanganyika, drove south and established a supply base in the lakeside town of Kigoma near the village of Ujiji. They then crossed Lake Tanganyika by boat to the Congo, arriving there on 24 April. Along the way to their main base, they ambushed the roads between the towns of Bendera and Albertville, controlled by Captain Mike Hall, the notorious mercenary who was loyal to Joseph Mobutu, the head of the Congolese army. It would really be an understatement to say that Che Guevara's mission in the Congo was doomed from the very start. There was division at the most basic level. As I alluded to, the first Cuban forces sent to the Congo consisted solely of black Cubans so as not to draw suspicion. However, this plan backfired by casting Che Guevara as an outsider within his closest, most loyal group of soldiers. The Cubans faced another issue that was far more fundamental. Not only were they wary of their leader, but they also lacked faith in the success of their mission. This was because this group of soldiers
good.
began their
Glad to
training
hear
months
it.
prior back in Cuba,
Any
not knowing
other
where
good
they would be sent.
meals
They
you
were constantly
planned?
in the dark and completely unprepared
Getting
for the
some much
Congolese
needed
terrain
rest?
that they were to
Good, I'm
maneuver.
glad.
Suffice to say that they lacked preparation, motivation, and confidence.
Doing all right.
On the other hand, the Congolese rebels, they were to fight
trying to
alongside,
focus
experienced
on
even greater division among
small
themselves.
wins that we have
These rebel forces
in the
were
world.
already divided before Shea's arrival.
To keep up that
Different
revolutionary
leaders and tribes
optimism,
controlled
you
the
know?
lands in the center of the country as well as in the east. So not only was the revolution fighting the enemy on too many fronts, but it was also fighting against itself. Not only did Guevara find difficulty in melding Cuban and Congolese soldiers, more importantly, he was unable to unify the local rebel forces that were already fighting and securing territory in the Congo. One of the foundations of Che Guevara's strategy relied on the unity of the people's forces in order to counter the unity of repressive forces. However, he soon realized that his own willingness to share the hardships of the peasant farmers in the Congo were neither matched by the rebel leaders who spent most of their time in Dar es Salaam, nor by members of the rebel forces who would pillage food from the peasants and steal what luxuries they possessed. From the outset, Che Guevara was also disappointed by the behavior of his troops, who many of them had contracted venereal diseases in the brothels of Kigoma. There was also a rift between Cuban troops and Congolese forces. This lack of unity extended to the Rwandan forces that had been sent to support the Congolese. All of this meant that the unification of the forces never came to fruition, and neither did their revolution.
I haven't seen that picture of him before.
One of the
Holding a
major
baby.
issues that resulted in Che Guevara's mission to the Congo being an epic fail was his lack of knowledge about the spiritual values of the Congolese, which led to frequent misunderstandings and misinterpretations of their actions. For instance, it is said that the Congolese rebels regarded carrying heavy loads as below their dignity and would wander off board when the Cubans tried to stage ambushes. Che Guevara's guerrilla tactics, such as trench warfare, directly opposed the African worldview. The Congolese would not dig trenches because the trenches were holes, and to the Congolese, holes
I'm
were
gonna
for
go
dead
start
bodies.
some
The
rice
Congolese troops were
for
also
dinner.
very superstitious.
But
They
I'll be
relied on
back.
what is called dawa, which are magic
I
potions
think I'll be
whipped up
keeping
by
it
witch
pretty simple
doctors.
with tray bakes.
They believed that
Ooh.
the dawa would turn bullets
Nice.
into water and
I-
protect combatants from
I
harm.
love
If one
having
soldier was
easy
seen to have been
meals.
killed or injured by a bullet, which was supposed to be
It's like the
deflected
easier
through
it
protection
is,
from
the
this
better.
portion,
I
other
mean, I
Congolese
hope it
forces
tastes
involved in
good
a
too.
battle would flee, believing
But
the dawa
you're good
to
at
be
cooking.
faulty. This lack of
Okay, I'll be right
familiarity
back.
with the local rebels' spiritual reality caused Che Guevara and the Cuban troops to constantly underestimate the Congolese tribes, provoking mutual distrust and dissension among the allied forces. The argument here is that Che Guevara would have been more successful in leading and uniting the two forces had he taken the element of African spirituality into account. As previously mentioned, Laurent Kabila was not immediately available to meet Che Guevara and his contingent. In fact, 2 months passed before Laurent Kabila and Che Guevara met face to face. And when they eventually met, Che's relationship with Kabila in particular and other rebel leaders in general soon unraveled. Che Guevara soon began to see Laurent Kabila as less than committed to the revolutionary cause. He even made references to Kabila's drinking habits. It is said that Kabila and his local commanders spent days drinking and then had huge meals without disguising what they were up to from the people around them. Drunkenness was widespread in the camp. Consequently, the army spent its time brawling and causing general mayhem. Whereas frequenting brothels and getting drunk are part and parcel of service in the armed forces, when coupled with a strong belief in tribal traditions such as taking a dawa to ward off enemy gunfire, this would prove to be a disastrous combination. And so as all of this was taking place, Che Guevara realized that the rebels could not win because of what he termed their corrupt and weak leaders, their failure to organize support among the local population, their distrust of one another, and their hopeless lack of discipline. The rebel leaders even used up petrol on pointless expeditions. When Che Guevara realized a poor example of Laurent Kabila as a leader and how it was affecting the morale of Cubans and Congolese alike, he stated that, and I quote, "Nothing leads me to believe he is the man of the hour." Ultimately, disagreement and lack of communication between Che Guevara and Laurent Kabila stalled the revolution's progress and permitted the enemy enough time to learn of Guevara's presence in the country, allowing them to reevaluate their plans and modify their tactics. By this point, Che Guevara and the Cubans felt depressed and disillusioned. They had all now been ill at one point or another since their arrival. Che Guevara himself suffered from bouts of asthma and malaria. As you can see, many odds did not favor the revolution in the Congo. Another main reason was the Congolese government's abundance of Western support, as well as the Organization of African Unity's willingness to compromise with the Congolese government. Around this time, Congo's president Joseph Kasavubu began to recognize that he would never get approval from the OAU if Moise Tshombe continued as prime minister. As a result, he replaced him with Evariste Kimba. The end of Moise Tshombe's regime precipitated a political reconciliation effort that would eventually undermine the rebellion, ending the support it had been receiving from various African states. This change in leadership would sabotage Che Guevara's support in Africa, as it even led to a compromise between Joseph Kasavubu and the Congolese rebel forces leadership. Interestingly though, it was Fidel Castro publicizing Che Guevara's farewell letter in October of 1965 that alienated Guevara from his most loyal supporter. Che Guevara had written this letter to Castro in April of 1965, severing political ties with Cuba in order to have the freedom to embark on this expedition in the Congo. Now Che Guevara was upset that the letter had been disclosed to the public so readily.
Sounds amazing.
In a revolution that Guevara estimated would take 5 years to achieve, he was morally defeated when Fidel Castro published this letter after a mere 6 months. It meant that Guevara suddenly found himself in a chaotic revolution without the support of his close friend.
I did not cook this myself.
As if this was not enough, on 1 November 1965, Che Guevara received an urgent message from Dar es Salaam warning him that the Tanzanian government had decided to end their support for his Cuban expeditionary force. He even asked for help from China, and Zhou Enlai, the premier of China at the time, advised him to continue building resistance groups but not to enter combat himself. But with no internal African support, Fidel Castro's public denouncement of Guevara and China's unwillingness to intercede, Che Guevara made the call to withdraw his troops and his revolution from the Congo. On 20 November 1965, Che Guevara organized the crossing of Lake Tanganyika back into Tanzania. This retreat took place just a few days before Joseph Mobutu, one of the main backers of Lumumba's execution, was installed as president of the Congo. Following this campaign in the Congo, Che Guevara remained covertly in the Cuban embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania to record his Congo diary. He then retreated to Prague in then Czechoslovakia, where he began planning for his final campaign in Bolivia, which began in October of 1966. Here in Bolivia, he joined guerrilla rebels in an effort to overthrow René Barrientos. Unfortunately, a lack of local support, the arrival of the United States CIA, and a manhunt
there are so
led
many
by
pictures of
Bolivian
Che
Rangers
Guevara
would bring a
with
swift end to the mission.
kids. I didn't know
On 8
that.
October 1967, the Bolivian
So
Rangers
cute.
captured Che Guevara, and on the following day, he was executed in La Higuera on the order of the military's high command. Don't forget to
ship
like and
me a
share the
bottle
video
of
if you
oxygen.
enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has
I
been
know.
Tatenda for African Biographics.
It
Until
does
next time,
smell good.
Cheers. Have a good one.
I love sag and chicken tikka masala. I just love Desi food. Desi people understand flavor and spices. Okay. Should we get into some Rousseau? I have enough time at the end, hopefully, so that we can finish this essay that we've been slowly working through over the past week or so. Discourse on the Origins of Inequality. Okay. I'm trying to remember where I left off. Okay, it was this paragraph. I feel that it belongs not to slaves to argue about liberty. So, just as a quick summary of what we've read so far, he is talking about how people are inherently good and that these societal structures, as people develop a concept of property and owning things, that then builds out a hierarchy, that then builds out a society, that these are the things that make people fight amongst each other, and it creates inequality. Again, he has more of like a condescending view of indigenous people, but then also claims that more of a nomadic lifestyle and culture is better. So we're holding the cognitive dissonance there, acknowledging it, where he wants to say that this is ideal, but then also refer to people in a derogatory manner. But his writing did inspire the French Revolution. A lot of people actually engaging in philosophy and being willing to implement some of these ideas in actuality. The book I'm reading, so the essay is Discourse on the Origins of Inequality by Rousseau, and the book that I have is my version of the Communist Manifesto and other revolutionary writings. I actually, surprisingly enough, got this book for one of my critical literary classes at BYU, the Mormon College, because we learned more about Marxism than we did about like feminism or race theory. That's something that I am confused by, but I think they were probably like at BYU like, oh, they're not going to be communists. Meanwhile, hi. Okay. So picking up from where we left off. Okay, so this previous part that he was talking about is that when people are in this more natural, free state that does not have these oppressive structures, that people feel more empowered to preserve their culture and that they actually have something to fight for, that there is this dignity that is offered to people when we aren't putting different values on people's worth in society. Little did they know. Exactly. Exactly. Flew under the radar. Okay. With regard to paternal authority, which from absolute government, and indeed all kinds of society, have been deduced by many writers, it will suffice, without recurring to the contrary arguments of Locke and Sidney, to remark that nothing is farther from the ferocious spirit of despotism than the mildness of that authority, which regards more the advantage of him who obeys than that of him who commands. That by the law of nature, the father is the master over the child no longer than his paternal assistance is necessary. That after that time they become both equal. The son, so also note that he's talking about a son and a father, how he's saying paternal authority. He was not for gender equality. He still had a very patriarchal perspective, so also keeping this in mind. The son being perfectly independent of the father, and owing him no obedience but only respect. For as to gratitude, it is a duty which ought to be paid, but which none hath a right to exact. Instead of saying that civil society derives its origin from paternal authority, we ought to say rather that the latter derives its principal influence from the former. No individual was ever acknowledged as the father of many till his sons and daughters settled about him. The goods of the father of which he is really the master are the ties of his children's independence, and he may bestow on them, if he pleases, a share of his property in proportion as they may have merited it of him by paying a constant obedience to his will. Now the subjects of an arbitrary despot are so far from having the like favor to expect from their chief, that they themselves and everything they possess are his property, or at least are considered by him as such, so that they are forced to receive as a favor the little he is pleased to let them enjoy of their own. When he strips them, he does them but justice, and is merciful that he permits them to live. Read kind of strange. By proceeding to compare in this manner the matter of fact with the matter of right, we should discover full as little reason as truth in the voluntary establishment of tyranny. It would also be no easy matter to prove the validity of a contract, binding only on one of the contracting parties, who should at the same time stake everything, and the other party nothing, so that none could suffer by such contract but he who had bound himself by it. So talking about this power imbalance of despots and tyrants where they essentially say, like, I own everything, everything is owed to me, and that the people who are disempowered have a whole lot on the line because they are not given as much. This hateful system is indeed, even in modern times, very different from that of wife and good monarchs, and especially of the kings of France, as may be seen by several passages in their edicts, particularly by that celebrated, one published in 1667, in the name and by the orders of Louis XIV. Louis? Like Lewis. Interesting. Which contains the following passage, quote, "Let it not therefore be said that the sovereign is not subject to the laws of his realm, since the contrary proposition is a maxim in the law of nations, which though flattery hath sometimes attacked, good princes have always defended as the tutelary divinity of their dominions. How much more just and rational is it to say, with the wife of Plato, that the perfect felicity of a kingdom consists in the obedience of subjects to their prince, that of the prince to the laws, and in the laws being just and constantly directed to the public good." So it's justifying monarchy and saying, like, well, as long as, like, the royals, the ruling class, are obeying the laws, okay, but they also, like, help to create the laws and don't care about obeying the laws most of the time. I shall not stay here to inquire whether, as free will is the noblest faculty of man, it be not degrading our very nature, reducing ourselves to a level with the brutes, the mere slaves of instinct, and even an affront to the author of our being, to renounce without reserve the most precious of all his gifts, and to subject ourselves to the commission of all the crimes. Oh my God, me immediately just saying true crime. Inserting that. To the commission of all the crimes he has forbidden us, merely for the gratification of a mad or cruel master. If this sublime artist ought not to be less irritated at seeing his workmanship entirely destroyed than thus dishonored, I shall ask only what right those, who were not afraid thus to debase themselves, could have to subject their posterity to the same ignominy? I usually see this word as ignominious. Ignominy. Okay, so that was right. Where did I leave off? I shall ask only what right those who were not afraid thus to debase themselves could have to subject their posterity to the same ignominy, and to renounce for them those blessings which they do not owe to the liberality of their progenitors, and without which life itself must be a burthen? I guess an old way of saying burden. Must be a burthen to all those who are worthy of it. Puffendorf says that we may divest ourselves of our liberty in favor of other men, in the same manner as we transfer our property from one to another by contracts and agreements. But this seems to be a very weak argument. For in the first place, the property I alienate becomes quite foreign to me, nor can I suffer from the abuse of it, but it very nearly concerns me that my liberty is not abused, and I cannot, without incurring in a great degree the guilt of what crimes I may be compelled to commit, expose myself to become the instrument of any. Besides, the right property being only of human institution, men may dispose of what they possess just as they please. But it is not the same with the essential blessings of nature, such as life and liberty, which every man is permitted to enjoy. Are we? That's news to me. And of which is at least dubious whether any have a right to divest themselves. By giving up the one, we degrade our being. By giving up the other, we do all in our power to annihilate it. And as no temporal enjoyment can indemnify us for the loss of either, it would be an offense at once to reason and nature to renounce them upon any account whatever. So he's essentially saying, talking about this concept of you can either go along with this system and you have limited free will, you are oppressed, you can have within this limited free will options to sell property, but there's not a whole lot of mobility there. But then if you don't abide by this system, then how are you supposed to live in the world when you are forced to be moving about it in a particular way with all of these societal confines? But though it were in our power to transfer our liberty, as we do our property, yet there would be a wide difference with regard to our children, who enjoy our substance only by virtue of a cession of our right. Whereas liberty, being a gift frankly bestowed on them by nature, their parents have no right whatever to divest them of it. Hence, to establish slavery, it was evidently necessary to do violence to nature, and thus it became necessary to alter nature in order to perpetuate such a right. In the meantime, the civilians who have gravely determined that the child of a slave comes into the world a slave have decided, in other words, that a man does not come into the world a man. Yeah. So he's for abolition, but he still is talking in very, white supremacist terms. It appears hence to me incontestable that governments did not commence with arbitrary power, but that this is the deprivation, the extreme term of government, bringing to back at length to the law of the strongest, against which it was at first designed as a remedy. Admitting, however, that they had begun in this manner such power, as it was illegal in itself, could not have served as a basis to the laws of society, nor of consequence to the inequality of its institution. Without entering at present upon the discussion that still remains to be made of the nature of the fundamental compact of all government, I content myself with adopting the common opinion concerning it, and confine myself here to the establishment of the political body as a real contract between the people and the chiefs elected by them, a contract by which both parties bind themselves to observe the laws therein expressed, which form the ties of their union. The people, having in respect to the social relations subsisting between them, concentrated all their wills in one person, the several articles concerning which this will is explained become so many fundamental laws, obligatory on all the members of the state without distinction. At the same time, that one of these laws regulates the choice and the power of the magistrates appointed to observe the execution of the whole. So naturally, in this idea, even when we have a semblance of democracy, of choosing leaders, that we sacrifice some of our own autonomy and power and give it to them to make decisions on behalf of us for society. That also creates inequality. But it lessens the inequality if these people in the ruling class, the people who are elected, these leaders actually follow the laws that they are implementing, but then it all goes sideways when they are not following these laws. They're not upholding their part of the contract. This power extends to everything relative to the support and maintenance of the Constitution, but not to anything that may tend to alter it. It is accordingly accompanied by honors, in order to render the laws and administrators of them respectable. These ministers are also distinguished by a certain personal prerogatives, by certain personal prerogatives in order to make them some recompense for the cares and fatigues inseparable from a good administration. So talking about people are supposed to be representing other people, but then you have honors that go along with it and titles and their own personal prerogatives, their own personal prejudices and desires that this can conflict with the larger sense of freedom that people experience. The magistrate, on his side, obliges himself to use the power he is entrusted with, comfortably to the design of his constituents, to maintain them all in the peaceable possession of their property, and to prefer on every occasion the public to his own particular interest. Yeah, if only. Before experience had shown, or a knowledge of the human heart enabled us to foresee the unavoidable abuses of such a constitution, it must have appeared so much to be complete, as those persons who were charged with the care of its preservation found themselves interested in it. For the office and privileges of magistracy, being solely built on the fundamental laws of the Constitution, the magistrates would cease to be lawful as soon as ever these ceased to exist. The people would no longer owe them obedience, and as the laws, not the magistrates, are essential to the being of a state, the several members of it would become entitled to their natural liberty. So, talking about how when these magistrates, these people who are in power, these leaders, when they are not upholding their end of the bargain, that it then makes it so the people, the public, don't have to uphold theirs in being obedient and not overthrowing them. If we reflect with ever so little attention on this subject, we shall find new arguments suggest themselves in confirmation of its truth, and that we might be convinced alone from the very nature of the contract that it cannot be irrevocable. For if there were no For if there were no superior power capable of ensuring the fidelity of the contracting parties, and of obliging them to perform their reciprocal engagements, they would be sole judges in their own cause, and each of them have a right to renounce his contract as soon as he found that the other had violated the terms of it, or that those terms no longer suited his private convenience. Yeah, so just what I was saying. It is upon this principle that the right of abdication may possibly be founded. Now, to consider only what is merely human in this institution, it is certain that if the magistrate who has all the power in his own hands and appropriates to himself all the advantages of the contract, yeah, that's what leaders tend to do, hath a right to divest himself of his authority. The people who suffer for all the faults of their chief, oh boy, and we are suffering because of the faults of our chief, commander-in-chief, have a much better right to renounce their dependence on him. But the terrible and innumerable disorders that would necessarily arise from so dangerous a privilege sufficiently demonstrate how much human government stood in need of a more solid basis than that of mere human reason, and how expedient it was for the public tranquillity that Providence should interpose to invest the sovereign authority with a sacred and inviolable, I don't know what that means. Inviolable? I haven't seen that word before. Never to be broken, infringed, or dishonored. And how expedient it was for the public tranquillity that Providence should interpose to invest the sovereign authority with a sacred and inviolable character, which might deprive subjects of the pernicious right of disposing of it to whomsoever they pleased. If the world had received no other advantages from religion, this alone would be sufficient to induce mankind to adopt and cultivate it, as it hath been the means of saving more blood than fanaticism hath caused to be spilt. But to follow the clue of our hypothesis, the different forms of government owe their origin to the inequalities subsisting between individuals at the time of their forming themselves into a community. If there happened to be any one man among them greatly preeminent in power, in virtue, in riches, or personal influence, he became sole magistrate, and the state assumed the form of monarchy. So this falls into the concept that I was talking about before with the Che Guevara video, how these revolutionaries would not need to revolt if there wasn't these oppressive circumstances. And the governments that are then made after these revolutions are a result of the oppression and disorder that happens from the original reason to revolt, and that those circumstances then dictate what kind of government people are able to establish. And so whatever kind of disorder and chaos existed because of this oppression, that it is very difficult to then all of a sudden completely reform society without still having some of these things be present. And so that then is implemented in certain government policies. And so this is a tactic that imperialist forces and colonizers use to justify and villainize, to justify stamping out revolutions and to justify their oppression and villainize these kinds of revolutions, because they say, well, look at the government that they have now. Like, it's very chaotic, or it is not very equitable. And it's like, well, if you hadn't have been interfering and being engaged in this capitalist extraction in the first place, there wouldn't be this kind of disorder. The different forms of government... Oh, wait, I already read that. If several, nearly equal in point of eminence, stood above the rest, they were elected jointly and formed an aristocracy. Again, among a people who have deviated less from a state of nature, and between those fortune of talents, there was no disproportion. They retained the supreme administration in common and formed a democracy. It was discovered in process of time which of these forms suited mankind the best. Some people remained altogether subject to the laws, others soon became slaves to their magistrates. The former labored to preserve their liberty, the latter, irritated to see others enjoy a blessing they had lost, employed their thoughts solely in making slaves of their neighbors. In fine, the one possessed themselves of wealth and conquest, and the other of happiness and virtue. Yeah, so talking about how when people are oppressed, that they then, a lot of the time when they are living in these hierarchical systems of human dignity, that in order to find acceptance, they then want to oppress other people in order to feel like they are elevated. In these different governments, the offices were at first elective, and when the influence of wealth was out of the question, the preference was allowed to merit. Oh, merit. That word that conservatives love but don't actually believe in. Which gives a natural ascendant, and to age possessed of experience in business, sedateness, and deliberation in council. The elders among the Hebrews, the Geronts at Sparta, and the Senate at Rome, nay, the very etymology of our word senior, served to show how much gray hairs were formerly held in veneration, of like seniority. But the more frequently the choice fell upon old men, the more frequently it was, of course, to be repeated, and the more the trouble of such repetitions were felt. Oh boy, this is still so true. How when you are valuing seniority over other things, it means that a lot of the time new ideas for positive change are rejected. Parties grew inveterate, civil wars arose, the lives of individuals were sacrificed to the pretended welfare of the state, and at length matters were carried so far as to be on the point of relapsing into their primitive state of anarchy and confusion. Anarchy, you say? The ambition of the chiefs induced them to profit by these circumstances, to perpetuate their respective offices in their several families. At the same time, the people, accustomed to dependence, to ease, the conveniences of life, and already incapable of breaking their fetters, agreed to augment their slavery in order to secure their tranquility. Thus it was that magistrates became hereditary, contracting the habit of considering their offices as a family estate, and themselves as proprietors of those communities, of which they were at first but the officers, to regard their fellow citizens as their slaves, and to look upon them as part of their stock of cattle, stilling themselves equal to the gods and king of kings. If we follow the progress of inequality in these different revolutions, we shall find that the establishment of laws and the right of property was the first term of it, the institution of magistrates the second, and the conversion of legal into arbitrary power the third and last, so that the difference between rich and poor were authorized by the first, that between the powerful and the weak by the second, and that between master and slave by the third, the last being the ultimate degree of inequality, and that term at which all the rest having at length arrived remain, till the government is entirely dissolved by revolutions, or brought back again to a legal constitution. To comprehend the necessity of this progress, we are not to consider so much the motives for the establishment of bodies politic as the forms they assume in their administration and the inconveniences that necessarily attend them. For the vices which render social institutions necessary are the very same which render the abuse of them unavoidable. Yes. So them talking about how, like, vices in people, how when we are creating these hierarchies that when people are oppressed, they are forced into desperate situations. They are forced to resist the system in order to get their needs met. So this is seen in the form of petty crime, where poverty is criminalized, and it perpetuates this idea or this larger concept of the state and how they use that as justification to keep criminalizing and oppressing the poor. If we accept also Sparta alone, whose laws chiefly regarded education, and where Lycurgus established such customs and manners as in a great measure rendered laws needless, the laws in general being less forcible than the passions, restrain mankind without altering them, so that it would not be difficult to prove that every government which should scrupulously comply with the ends of its institution, carefully guarding against change and corruption, hath been unnecessarily instituted. For a country in which no one should either evade the laws or make an ill use of magisterial power could require neither laws nor magistrates. Political distinctions necessarily induce social distinctions, yes. The inequality increasing between the chiefs and the people soon become perceptible among individuals and receives various modifications according to passions, talents, and circumstances. The magistrate cannot usurp any illegal power without distinguishing his creatures, with whom he must share it. And to this, that individuals suffer themselves to be oppressed only in proportion as they are hurried on by a blind ambition, and looking rather below than above them, they come in time to love authority more than independence. When they submit to slavery, it is only that they may enslave others in turn. It is no easy matter to make him obey, who has no ambition to command, nor would the most refined policy find it possible to enslave a people who should only desire to be independent. But inequality easily makes its way among base and ambitious minds, ever ready to run any risk and almost indifferent whether they command or obey as fortune is favorable or adverse. Thus, there must have been a time in which the senses of the people were fascinated to such a degree that their rulers had only to say to the most pitiful wretch, Be great, you and all your posterity. Like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. To make him immediately appear great in the eyes of everyone as well as his own. His descendants took still more upon them, and in that proportion to their distance, the more obscure and uncertain the cause, the greater the effect. The greater number of idlers any family had produced, the more illustrious it was accounted. Yeah, so the less people work, the more illustrious they are viewed as. The more you can oppress other people and take advantage of their labor and steal their wages, that is viewed as being illustrious. You get more power in society. I should have put my gloves on to begin with, but here we go. As I'm like starting to like wrinkle the pages, I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that. Okay. If this were a place to descend to minute particulars, I could readily explain how inequalities in point of credit and authority became unavoidable among private persons, as soon as ever their union obliged them to compare themselves one with another, and to remark the differences which they find by the continual use every man must make of his neighbor. Okay, we have a footnote. Distributive justice, indeed, would oppose this rigorous equality of a state of nature, even if it were practicable in civil society, and as all the members of the state owe it their services in proportion to their talents and abilities, so they ought, on their part, to be distinguished and favored in the same proportion to the services they have actually rendered it. It is in this sense we must understand the passage of Isocrates, in which he extols the primitive Athenians for having determined which of the two kinds of equality was the most useful, that which consists in dividing the same advantages indiscriminately among the citizens in common, or that which consists in distributing them to each according to his merit. These able politicians, adds the orator, banishing that unjust inequality which makes no distinction between bad men and men of probity, adhered inviolably to that which rewards and punishes every man according to his desert. Whoops. But in the first place, there never existed a society, to whatever degree of corruption some have arrived, wherein no difference was made between the good and bad, and with regard to manners wherein no measures can be prescribed by law exact enough to serve as a practical rule to magistrates. It is with great prudence that, in order not to leave the fortune of quality of the citizens to their discretion, she prohibits their passing judgment on persons and confines it to actions. There are no manners, unless such are pure as were those of the ancient Romans. Pure, I wouldn't say that. That can bear with the offices of censors. Such a tribunal among us would throw everything into confusion. The difference between good and bad men is determined by public esteem, the magistrate being only a judge of what is strictly just and right, whereas the public is the truest judge of manners. A judge of such integrity and penetration, although it may be sometimes deceived, it can never be corrupt, unless they are brainwashed. The rank of citizens ought, therefore, to be regulated, not according to their personal merit, as this method would put in the power of the magistrate to make an almost arbitrary application of the law, but according to the actual services they do the state, which are capable of being subjected to a more exact estimate. So, how much do you contribute? That is how people should be valued in a society. That's what he is advocating for. Okay. These differences are of several kinds, but riches, rank, power, and personal merit being the principal distinctions by which men form an estimate of each other in a state of society, I could prove that the harmony of incongruity of these different forces is the surest indication of the good or bad original constitution of any state. I could show that among these four kinds of inequality, personal qualities being the origin of all the others, wealth is that in which they all terminate, yes. Because capitalism. Because tending most immediately to the prosperity of individuals, and being the most easy of communication, riches are made of use to purchase every other distinction. Yes, especially when you are within this capitalist or colonizing system, that is the whole point, is to acquire wealth. We are enabled to judge by this observation pretty exactly how far people may have deviated from their primitive institution, and how far they still have to go ere they arrive at the extreme term of corruption. I could explain how much this universal desire of reputation, honor, and preference, with which we are all inflamed, exercises our faculties and powers, how much it excites and multiplies our passions, and by creating a universal competition, or rather enmity, among mankind, occasions numberless disappointments and catastrophes among the innumerable pretenders whom it engages to enter on the same career. I could show that it is to this desire of being talked of, to this unremitting rage of distinguishing ourselves, that we owe the very best and the worst things among us, our virtues and our vices, our sciences and our errors, our heroes and our philosophers, that is to say, a great many bad things and a very few good ones. In a word, I could prove that if we have a few rich and powerful men placed on the pinnacle of fortune and grandeur, while the groveling crowd are in want and obscurity, it is because the former prize what they enjoy only in the degree that others are destitute of it. Yes, and that without changing their condition, they would cease to be happy the moment people cease to be miserable. Yeah, so this concept of like people only want these kinds of distinctions because it makes them different from other people, that it makes them above other people. So what is so ironic about these capitalists and billionaires is that they are trying to get rid of all human labor, which, I mean, that has been done by capitalists with like industry and technology. But the irony of it is it is this it is this cannibalistic perspective and project, because once they get rid of the people that they feel so superior to and the people that they are siphoning wages from, getting labor from, they then don't have a class of people to feel superior to. And they drive people out of work and therefore existence, and then they don't have anyone else to exploit. But they don't care about that as long as they feel like they can be oppressing other people in the meantime. These particulars alone, however, would furnish matter for a more considerable performance, in which might be estimated the advantages and disadvantages of every species of government, relatively to man in a state of nature, and at the same time might be unveiled all the different appearances which inequality hath at times put on to this day, and may hereafter put on, even to the end of time, according to the nature of those several governments, and those alterations in them which must unavoidably be occasioned by time. We should then behold the multitude oppressed by domestic tyrants, in consequence of the very precautions taken to guard against foreign tyrants. Yeah, so how tyrants use this fear-mongering and support their own power by saying like, oh, we're resisting these foreign tyrants. Sounds very familiar. We should see oppression continually gain ground without its being possible for the oppressed to know where it would stop, or what lawful means might be left them to check its progress. We should see the rights of individuals and the freedom of nations by slow degrees extinguished, and the complaints, protests, and appeals of the weak neglected as seditious murmurings. Yeah, seditious as being impertinent. We should see the honor of defending the common cause confined by policy to a mercenary part of the people. We should see imposts and taxes rendered necessary by such means, and this disheartened husbandman leave his fields even in the midst of peace, and quit the plough to take up the sword. We should see fatal and capricious maxims established with regard to points of honor, the champions of their country sooner or later becoming her enemies, and perpetually pointing their swords to the breasts of their fellow citizens. The time would even come when they might be heard to say to the oppressor of their country, oh boy, this is Latin, Pectori si fratris gladium, iuguloque parentis, candere me ubies gravidaque in viscera partu conigis, in vita perigam tamen omnia dextra. Which means, if you bid me bury my sword in my brother's breast, or my father's throat, or the body of my pregnant wife, okay, I will perform it all, even if my hand be reluctant. Yeah, where it's like once you become an instrument of the government, you are forced to do all sorts of evil. From the great inequality of fortunes and conditions, from the vast variety of passions and of talents, of useless and pernicious arts, of frivolous sciences, would arise a multitude of prejudices equally contrary to reason, happiness, and virtue. We should see the magistrates foment everything that might serve to weaken men united in society by promoting divisions among them. Yeah, like identity politics and xenophobia and racism and transphobia, just queerphobia, like all of these aspects that governments use to make it so we're fighting amongst each other rather than fighting them. Everything that sows in it the seeds of actual division, while it breathes the air of apparent harmony, everything that can inspire the different ranks of people with mutual hatred and distrust by an opposition of their rights and interests, and of course, strengthen that power which comprehends them all. It is from the midst of this disorder and these revolutions that despotism, gradually rearing up its frightful head and devouring everything that remains sound and untainted in any part of the state, would at length trample both on the laws and the people, and establish herself on the ruins of the republic. The times which should immediately precede this last change would be times of trouble and calamity, but at length the monster would swallow up everything, and the people would no longer have either chiefs or laws, but merely tyrants. From this instant, there would be no longer any regard paid to virtue or morals, for despotism, qui ex honesto nulla est spes, wherever it prevails, and that's what that means, I guess, admits of no other master. It no sooner speaks than probity and duty lose their influence, the most implicit obedience being the only virtue which slaves can practice. Yeah, where our options become so limited, where obedience is the only thing that keeps the peace because it is enforced by these oppressors. This is the last term of inequality, the point that closes the circle and that meets from which we set out. Here it is that private persons return to their primitive equality because they are no longer of importance, and that subjects, having no longer any law but the will of their master, nor their master any other restraint than his passions, all notions of moral good and all principles of equity vanish. Yeah. So, like, when we have leaders who are not interested in acting in a moral manner, that it doesn't provide a desire for the people that they rule to be acting in a moral manner. It is here that everything returns to the law of the strongest, and of course to a new state of nature, differing from what we set out from, as that was a state of nature in its first purity, and this the consequence of excessive corruption. There is so little difference between the two states in other respects, and the contract of government is so far dissolved by despotism, that the despot is no longer master than while he remains the strongest. But as soon as he can be expelled, he may be so without having any right to complain of injustice. The popular, that's not injustice when they deserve to be taken down. The popular insurrection that ends in the death of despotism of a sultan is as lawful an act as those by which he might, the day before, dispose of the lives and fortunes of his subjects. Yeah, so it's saying, like, it's just to take down these people when they're acting in an unjust manner. As he was supported alone by force, so is he, by the same force, subverted. Thus everything that takes place according to natural order, and whatever may be the event of such frequent and precipitate revolutions, no one man has reason to complain of the injustice of another, but only of his own ill fortune and indiscretion. In thus pursuing the almost obliterated traces by which man hath passed from a state of nature to a state of society, by restoring with the intermediate situations which I have pointed out, those which want of time hath obliged me to suppress, or my imagination hath not suggested, the attentive reader cannot fail to be struck at the vast distance which separates the two states. It is in tracing this slow succession of things he may find the solution of a number of problems in politics and morals, which philosophers find it very difficult to solve. He will perceive that, mankind being different in different ages, the reason why Diogenes would not find out a man was that he sought among his contemporaries the man of an earlier period. He will see that Cato fell with Rome and liberty because he did not suit the age in which he lived, the greatest of men serving only to astonish that world, which would have readily obeyed him had he lived 500 years sooner. In a word, he will find himself in a condition to comprehend how the soul and the passions of men change, as it were by insensible alterations, their very nature, how our wants and pleasures in the end change their objects, and how the original man vanishing by degrees, society offers to our inspection only an assemblage of artificial men and factitious passions, the work of these several new relations, and without any foundation in nature. We are taught nothing on this subject by reflection, but what is entirely confirmed by experience. The savage and the uncivilized man, differ so much with regard to their passions and inclinations, that those things which constitute the happiness of one would reduce the other to despair. The first requires nothing but sustenance, liberty, and rest. He desires only to live and be exempt from labor. Nay, the apathy of the Stoic falls short of his consummate indifference for every other object. Civilized man is, on the contrary, perpetually in motion, sweating, toiling, and racking his brains to find out occupation still more laborious. He continues dredging to his last moment, and even seeks death to put himself in a situation to live, or renounces life to acquire immortality. He pays his court to men in power, whom he hates, and to the wealthy whom he despises. He stops at nothing in order to have the honor of serving them. He is not ashamed to value himself on his own meanness and their protection. While, proud of his chains, he speaks with disdain of those who have not the honor of wearing them as well as himself. So just reiterating the concept of how people are these willful servants of the state and of oppression, as long as they feel like they have an advantage over other people. What a sight would the perplexing and envied labors of a European minister of state present to the eyes of a Caribbean? What a cruel death would not this indolent savage prefer to such a horrid life, the labors of which are seldom even sweetened by the pleasure of doing good? But to see the motives of all this solicitude, it is requisite that the words power and reputation should have some meaning affixed to them in his mind. It is requisite he should know that there are men who set a value on the looks of the rest of mankind, who can be made happy and satisfied with themselves rather on the testimony of other people than on their own. In reality, the source of all these differences is that the savage lives within himself, while the citizen constantly lives beside himself, studying only how to live in the opinion of others, insomuch that he seems to receive the consciousness of his own existence merely from the judgment of others concerning him. Yeah, that I only have a concept of myself because other people are telling me what this concept is and how I compare to them. It is not to my present purpose to insist on the great indifference of good and evil, which takes rise from this disposition in spite of our many fine discourses of morality, or to show how everything in this kind being reduced to appearances, all is mere art and mummery, including even honor, friendship, virtue, and often even vice itself, of which we at length learn the secret to make our boast. To show, in short, how being ever on the inquiry of others what we are, and never daring to ask ourselves so delicate a question in the midst of so many sublime maxims of philosophy, humanity, and politeness, we have nothing to show for ourselves but a frivolous and deceitful external appearance, honor without virtue, reason without wisdom, and pleasure without happiness. It is sufficient that I have proved this not to be the original state of man, but that it is merely the spirit of society and the inequality which society produces, that thus transform and diversify all our natural inclinations. Thus have I endeavored to trace the origin and display the progress of the inequality of mankind, with the institution and abuse of political societies, as far as these things are capable of being deduced from the nature of man merely by the light of reason, and independent of those sacred tenets which give the sanction of divine right to sovereign authority. The inferences which may be drawn from a view of this exhibition are first, that as there is hardly any inequality among men in a state of nature, all the inequality which now prevails owes its strength and growth to the development of our faculties and the improvement of our understanding, becoming at length permanent and lawful by the establishment of property and the institution of laws. Secondly, it follows that a moral inequality, authorized by any right merely arbitrary, clashes with natural right, as often as it does not combine in the same proportion as physical inequality. Yeah, so he is saying that the rights that are granted by institutions, they do not compare to the natural human rights that we should have, that we are owed and are born with. A distinction which determines sufficiently what we ought to think of that species of inequality which prevails in all civilized countries, since it is plainly contrary to the law of nature that infants should command old men, fools conduct philosophers, and that the privileged few should gorge themselves with superfluities, while the starving multitude are in want of the common necessaries of life. Do you see how similar these circumstances are, talking about the upper class gorging themselves while everyone is in want? How people can only be under these kinds of circumstances for so long before they rise up and they take what they need because it's out of necessity, not because they're trying to be rebellious, but because the circumstances make people realize how enslaved, like metaphorically, sometimes literally, are to the state. Okay. Should we get into the Scarlet Pimpernel? This is chapter 10. So we had in the previous chapter, Chauvelin, he came and captured Sir Andrew and Sir Anthony. And he took a note that shows that Armand Saint-Just is acting as a double agent, essentially. He's pretending to be for the revolution, the Republic of France, but he is working for the British and trying to suppress the revolution. Like the French Revolution and its middle class uprising. Exactly. And how when there is this endless greed, people can only be under those circumstances for so long before they start to exact the same kind of injustice they felt on their oppressors. Like, what else can you expect when people are living that way for so long? Okay. This is chapter 10, In the Opera Box. It was one of the gala nights at Covent Garden Theatre, the first of the autumn season in this memorable year of grace, 1792. The house was packed, both in the smart orchestra boxes and the pit, as well as in the more plebeian balconies and galleries above. Plebeian. Hi. Speaking of class, we have a footnote here. Gluck's Orpheus, Orfeo et Eurydice, an opera by the German composer Christoph Gluck. I don't know if I'm saying that right. With a libretto by Raniero Calzabigi, premiered in 1762 in Vienna, a French adaptation of Gluck's opera Orphée et Eurydice, for which Pierre-Louis Moline translated Calzabigi's libretto, was first performed at the Paris Opera in 1772. Okay. Gluck's Orpheus made a strong appeal to the more intellectual portions of the house, whilst the fashionable women, the gaily dressed... The The gaily dressed and brilliant throng spoke to the eye of those who cared but little for this latest importation from Germany. Selina Storace had been duly applauded after her grand aria by her numerous admirers. Benjamin Incledon, yeah, I think that's right, the acknowledged favorite of the ladies, had received special gracious recognition from the royal box, and now the curtain came down after the glorious finale to the second act, and the audience, which had hung spellbound on the magic strains of the great maestro, seemed collectively to breathe a long sigh of satisfaction, previous to letting loose its hundreds of waggish and frivolous tongues. In the smart orchestra boxes, many well-known faces were to be seen. Mr. Pitt, overweighted with cares of state, was finding brief relaxation in tonight's musical treat. The Prince of Wales, jovial, rotund, somewhat coarse and commonplace in appearance, moved about from box to box, spending brief quarters of an hour with these of his more intimate friends. In Lord Grenville's box, too, a curious, interesting personality attracted everyone's attention. A thin, small figure with shrewd, sarcastic face and deep-set eyes, attentive to the music, keenly critical of the audience, dressed in immaculate black, with dark hair free from any powder. Lord Grenville, Foreign Secretary of State, paid him marked, though frigid, deference. Here and there, dotted about among distinctly English types of beauty, distinctly English types of beauty, that's a funny phrase. One or two foreign faces stood out in marked contrast. The haughty aristocratic cast of countenance of the many French royalist émigrés who, persecuted by the relentless revolutionary faction of their country, had found a peaceful refuge in England. Yeah, they were able to escape and be at peace and still enjoy the benefits of class. On these faces, sorrow and care were deeply writ. Oh, so sad. The women especially paid but little heed, either to the music or to the brilliant audience. No doubt their thoughts were far away, with husband, brother, son, maybe still in peril or lately succumbed to a cruel fate. Okay, what about, like, daughters and shit? Among these I guess I shouldn't say shit. Just, female people, femme people. Among these, the Comtesse de Tournay de Basserive, but lately arrived from France, was a most conspicuous figure, dressed in deep, heavy black silk, with only a white lace kerchief to relieve the aspect of mourning about her person. She sat beside Lady Portarles, who was vainly trying, by witty sallies and somewhat broad jokes, to bring a smile to the Comtesse's sad mouth. Behind her sat little Suzanne and the Vicomte, both silent and somewhat shy among so many strangers. Suzanne's eyes seemed wistful when she first entered the crowded house. She had looked eagerly all around, scanned every face, scrutinized every box. She's trying to look for Sir Andrew, I'm guessing. Hi, Teeny. Come here. I can see her outside. She's meowing. Oh, nope. She turned around. Evidently, the one face she wished to see was not there, for she settled herself quietly behind her mother, listened apathetically to the music, and took no further interest in the audience itself. "Ah, Lord Grenville," said Lady Portarles, as following a discreet knock, the clever, interested head of the Secretary of State appeared in the doorway of the box. "You could not arrive more apropos. Here is Madame la Comtesse de Tournay, positively dying to hear the latest news from France." The distinguished diplomatist had come forward and was shaking hands with the ladies.
"Alas," he said sadly, "it is of the very worst. The massacres continue. Paris literally reeks with blood, and the guillotine claims 100 victims a day."
Oh, so sad. Pale and tearful, the Comtesse was leaning back in her chair, listening horror-struck to this brief and graphic account of what went on in her own misguided country. Misguided? I don't think so.
"Oh, monsieur,"
the thing, her catchphrase, apparently. She said in broken English, "It is dreadful to hear all that, and my poor husband is still in that awful country. It is terrible for me to be sitting here in a theatre all safe and in peace, whilst he is in such peril." "Lord, madam," said honest, bluff Lady Portarles, "your sitting in a convent won't make your husband safe, and you have your children to consider. They are too young to be dosed with anxiety and premature mourning." The Comtesse smiled through her tears at the vehemence of her friend. Lady Portarles, whose voice and manner would not have misfitted a jockey, had a heart of gold, and hid the most genuine sympathy and most gentle kindness. "Hi. Hi, Timmy." And the most gentle kindness beneath the somewhat coarse manners affected by some ladies at the time.
"Besides which, madam," added Lord Grenville, "did you not tell me yesterday that the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel had pledged their honour to bring Monsieur le Comte safely across the Channel?"
"Ah, yes," replied the Comtesse, "and that is my only hope. I saw Lord Hastings yesterday. He assured me again."
"Then I'm sure you need have no fear. What the League have sworn they will surely accomplish."
"Ah," added the old diplomatist with a sigh, "if I were but a few years younger." "Yes? Hi. Come here." We'll see if she hops up here.
"La, man," interrupted honest Lady Portarles, "you are still young enough to turn your back on that French scarecrow that sits enthroned in your box tonight." "I wish I could, but your ladyship must remember that in serving our country we must put prejudice aside. Monsieur Chauvelin is the accredited agent of his government."
"Hi, Buck. Welcome, welcome."
"Odds fish, man," she retorted. "You don't call those bloodthirsty ruffians over there a government, do you?"
"Well, yes."
"It has not been thought advisable, as yet," said the minister guardedly, "for England to break off diplomatic relations with France, and we cannot therefore refuse to receive any courtesy the agent she wishes to send us." "Diplomatic relations be demned, my lord! That sly little fox over there is nothing but a spy, I'll warrant, and you'll find, and I'm much mistaken, that he'll concern himself with little with such diplomacy, beyond trying to do mischief to royalist refugees, to our heroic Scarlet Pimpernel, and to the members of that brave little league."
"I am sure," said the Comtesse. "Hi, Tiny." Pursing her thin lips, "that if this Chauvelin wishes to do us mischief, he will find a faithful ally and Lady Blakeney."
"Bless the woman!"
ejaculated Lady Portarles. "Did ever anyone see such perversity? My Lord Grenville, you have the gift of the gab. Will you please explain to Madame la Comtesse that she is acting like a fool? In your position here in England, Madame," she added, turning a wrathful and resolute face towards the Comtesse, so she's mad that the Comtesse is speaking ill of Marguerite.
"You cannot afford to put on the hoity-toity airs you French aristocrats are so fond of. Lady Blakeney may or may not be in sympathy with those ruffians in France. She may or may not have had anything to do with the arrest and condemnation of Saint Cyr, or whatever the man's name is, but she is the leader of fashion in this country." She's like, I don't care what she has done. She is the most fashionable, and we must give her respect. "Sir Percy Blakeney has more money than any half-dozen other men put together. He is hand and glove with royalty, and your trying to snub Lady Blakeney will not harm her, but will make you look a fool. Isn't that so, my lord?" So, as we were reading with Rousseau,
how he was talking about money being the main thing that people are able to acquire power and influence and merit in society, that this is true here, where Lady Portarles is essentially saying that it doesn't matter what their political views are. He has the most money, and they're fashionable because he has the most money, so we need to respect them. But what Lord Grenville thought of this matter, or to what reflections this homely tirade of Lady Portarles led the Comtesse de Tournay, remained unspoken, for the curtain had just risen on the third act of Orpheus, and admonishments to silence came from every part of the house. Lord Grenville took a hasty farewell of the ladies, and slipped back into his box, where Monsieur Chauvelin had sat all through this entr'acte, with his eternal snuff-box in hand, and with his keen, pale eyes intently fixed upon a box opposite him, where, with much frou-frou of silken skirts, much laughter, and general stir of curiosity amongst the audience, Marguerite Blakeney had just entered, accompanied by her husband, and looking divinely pretty beneath the wealth of her golden reddish curls, slightly besprinkled with powder, and tied back at the nape of her graceful neck with a gigantic black bow. Always dressed in the very latest vagary of fashion, Marguerite alone among the ladies that night had discarded the crossover fichu and broad-lapelled overdress, which had been in fashion for the last 2 or 3 years. She wore the short-waisted, classical-shaped gown, which so soon was to become the approved mode in every country in Europe. It suited her graceful, regal figure to perfection, composed as it was of shimmering stuff, which seemed a mass of rich gold embroidery. So, again, showing that, like, she is the one starting these fashions. Or she picks it up from other places and has the means to acquire them and wear them in society. As she entered, she leant for a moment out of the box, taking stock of all those present whom she knew. Many bowed to her as she did so, and from the royal box there came also a quick and gracious salute. I'm just seeing how long this is. Oh, this is a longer chapter than what we normally have. If I can turn this page to figure it out. Okay. I'm going to read just a couple more pages. Chauvelin watched her intently all through the commencement of the third act, as she sat enthralled with the music, her exquisite little hand toying with a small, jeweled fan. Cute. Her regal head, her throat, arms, and neck covered with magnificent diamonds, oh boy, and rare gems, the gift of the adoring husband who sprawled leisurely by her side, which these things were gotten by colonial extraction and enslaving people. Marguerite was passionately fond of music. Orpheus charmed her tonight. The very joy of living was writ plainly upon the sweet young face. It sparkled out of the merry blue eyes, and lit up the smile that lurked around the lips. She was, after all, but 25, in the heyday of youth, the darling of a brilliant throng, adored, feted, petted, cherished. 2 days ago, the Daydream had returned from Calais, bringing her news that her idolized brother had safely landed, that he thought of her and would be prudent for her sake. What wonder for the moment, in listening to Gluck's impassioned strains, that she forgot her disillusionments, forgot her vanished love dreams, forgot even the lazy, good-humored non-entity who had made up for his lack of spiritual attainments by lavishing worldly advantages upon her. She's calling her husband, Sir Percy, a non-entity. That is very rude, but also I don't care because he is extremely classist. He had stayed beside her in the box just as long as convention demanded, making way for His Royal Highness and for the host of admirers who in a continued procession came to pay homage to the Queen of Fashion. Sir Percy had strolled away to talk more to congenial friends, probably. Marguerite did not even wonder whither he had gone. She cared so little. She had had a little court round her, composed of the jeunesse dorée. gilded, that is, privileged youth of London, and had just dismissed them all, wishing to be alone with Gluck for a while. A discreet knock at the door roused her from her enjoyment. "Come in," she said with some impatience, without turning to look at the intruder. Chauvelin, waiting for his opportunity, noted she was alone, and now, without pausing for that impatient "come in," he quietly slipped into the box, and the next moment was standing behind Marguerite's chair.
"A word with you, citoyenne," he said quietly.
Marguerite turned quickly in alarm, which was not altogether feigned.
"Lord, man, you frightened me," she said with a forced little laugh. "Your presence is entirely inopportune. I want to listen to Gluck, and have no mind for talking." "But this is my only opportunity," he said as quietly, and without waiting for permission. He drew a chair close behind her, so close that he could whisper in her ear without disturbing the audience, and without being seen in the dark background of the box. "This is my only opportunity," he repeated, as she vouchsafed him no reply. "Lady Blakeney is always so surrounded, so feted by her court, that a mere old friend has but very little chance." "Faith, man," she said impatiently, "you must seek for another opportunity then. I am going to Lord Grenville's ball tonight, after the opera. So are you, probably. I'll give you 5 minutes, then." 3 minutes in the privacy of this box are quite sufficient for me," he rejoined placidly, "and I think that you will be wise to listen to me, citoyen Saint-Just."
Marguerite instinctively shivered. Chauvelin had not raised his voice above a whisper. He was now quietly taking a pinch of snuff. Yet there was something in his attitude, something in those pale, foxy eyes, foxy, which seemed to freeze the blood in her veins, as would the sight of some deadly, hitherto unguessed peril. Also, foxy eyes, like it's saying that he's like being cunning and he's devious, but he actually is like trying to work for a liberated France. But this idea of having like fox-like eyes as well is fairly racist, because especially at the time of this Orientalism of viewing people who are Asian with having fox-like eyes and using it as a way to make him look like he is a villain. In those pale, foxy eyes, which seemed to freeze the blood in her veins, as would the sight of some deadly, hitherto unguessed peril.
"Is that a threat, citoyen?" she asked at last. "Nay, fair lady," he said gallantly, "only an arrow shot into the air."
He paused a moment, like a cat which sees a mouse running heedlessly by, ready to spring, yet waiting with that feline sense of enjoyment, of mischief about to be done. Then he said quietly,
"Your brother Saint-Just is in peril."
Not a muscle moved in the beautiful face before him. He could only see it in profile, for Marguerite seemed to be watching the stage intently, but Chauvelin had a keen observer. He was a keen observer. He noticed the sudden rigidity of the eyes, the hardening of the mouth, the sharp, almost paralyzed tension of the beautiful, graceful figure.
"Lud, then," she said with affected merriment, "since 'tis one of your imaginary plots, you'd best go back to your own seat and leave me to enjoy the music."
And with her hand, she began to beat time nervously against the cushion of the box. Selina Storace was singing the Che Faro to an audience and hung spellbound upon the prima donna's lips. Chauvelin did not move from his seat. He quietly watched that tiny, nervous hand, the only indication that his shaft had indeed struck home. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to have to leave it. But here's another little illustration of Marguerite and Chauvelin at the opera. Him being looked at as this evil villain when he is actually trying to have more dignity and equality for all of the people in France. Okay, that's going to be it for me today. But tomorrow, I want to go over Banned Book Club. I forgot to do that today. Whoops. Reading The Giver, chapters 18 and 19. And we're going to talk about the Congo. But then also, Tan, I want to go over those articles you sent. I'm very excited because they're excellent. Like, this is incredible to get people who are interested in subject matter like this. So thank you. Thank you for being here and for participating. It was good chatting with you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you are. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye.